You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, it is now time for the last show of this week, the most disruptive show in those divided states. In the politically independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to the headlines. There's madness in Michigan. 6 men there are under arrest on federal charges that they plotted to kill Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, while 7 others are under arrest for plotting to storm Michigan's Capitol building to start a civil war. Governor Whitmer, the attorney general for that state, and former Vice President Joe Biden suggested President Trump's rhetoric played a role here. 7 of the men are either founded or are affiliated with a self-styled militia calling themselves the, quote, Wolverine Watchmen, end quote. Michigan is nicknamed the Wolverine State for its one-time abundance of Wolverines. The 7 men were charged with state crimes which carry penalties of 2 to 20 years in prison. The state's attorney general, Dana Nessel, accused them of collecting addresses of police officers in order to target them, threatening to start a civil war, quote, leading to societal collapse, end quote, and planning to kidnap the governor and other government officials. There's signs of a possible détente between Armenia and Azerbaijan as the foreign ministers have confirmed that they will come for talks to Moscow. This will mark the first time that they have both shown real willingness to discuss a ceasefire. Azerbaijan confirmed that Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov will take part in talks in Moscow as Azeri and ethnic Armenian forces clashed again over Nagorno-Karabakh. Fighting there has continued for a second week as Armenia and Azerbaijan battle over the breakaway region. We are now on day 13 of those clashes. So far, the two rivals are ignoring international appeals for a ceasefire and have accused one another of causing civilian and military casualties since clashing first on September 27th, at least first this time around. This has been a decades-long crisis. There's a debate debacle in the states. President Trump's re-election campaign says the Biden campaign should stick to their original debate schedule. The two were supposed to meet next week for their second debate in Miami. However, the commission responsible for the debate said they should switch to a virtual debate format due to the president's coronavirus infection. The president said he's not willing to attend a debate virtually. Biden's campaign then said if they weren't going to do the debate that night, that he'd host a town hall to be moderated by George Stephanopoulos. Trump has continued to call for the debate to be held in person, with his campaign manager citing Trump's doctor, saying that basically, as he said, that there was, quote, no medical reason why the Commission on Presidential Debates should shift the debate to a virtual setting, postpone it, or otherwise alter it in any way. The date of that upcoming debate is still uncertain. This comes as President Donald Trump said on Thursday he may return to the campaign trail with a rally on Saturday after the White House physician says he had completed his course of therapy for the novel coronavirus and could resume public events. Trump said he was likely to take a test for the coronavirus on Friday after testing positive for it a week ago. The White House has declined to say when the president last tested negative for COVID-19. The White House physician Sean Conley said earlier on Thursday that Trump had completed his course of therapy for the disease, had remained stable since returning to the White House from a military hospital on Monday, and could resume public engagements on Saturday. That's this Saturday. In a memo released by the White House, Trump's doctor said that Trump had responded extremely well to treatment without any evidence of adverse effects. And I'm just going to quote here directly from that memo. Since returning home, his physical exam has remained stable and devoid of any indications to suggest progression of illness. Saturday will be day 10 since Thursday's diagnosis, and based on the trajectory of advanced diagnostics the team has been conducting, I fully anticipate the president's safe return to public engagements at that time. End quote. Jamarl, what's your take? Do you think Trump should be returning to the public eye? Do you think he should be going back into hosting rallies and doing events? What's your take on that?
No, absolutely not. I mean, because it's not that he's in a bubble by himself. I mean, if Trump, look, I don't care if he does it, if he's in a bubble doing it. Like if they put one of those bubbles, like the bubble boy, if they put him in a bubble when he's doing his rally, I have no issue. All of my issues go away.
I think you just want to see Trump in a bubble.
It's not that I want to see him in a bubble. It's I want to see him not infecting other people. And I don't know, if because he's still getting treatments based on the reporting. And so it's not a situation where he's, and people take tests all the time where they're, what's her name? The one who was suspected of being Typhoid Mary. She had a test while she was ill. And so it's like she had symptoms, took a test, she was clean, took a test again, she was dirty. So it's taking one test. It's not in and of itself, which is the reason why they have the people taking multiple tests in order to determine whether they're ill or not. I don't have an issue with tests with Trump campaigning. My issue is with the potential for Trump getting other people infected. That's all. And so it's not, I don't have strong feelings about it.
So what if you were to, this is the thing. What if he continuously takes tests and they keep coming back negative?
Then Trump can campaign. Then I have no issue. My issue goes away.
That's the thing.
Yeah, my issue goes away.
We'll see.
Look, we'll see. Trump's campaigns are entertaining to me.
I think they're entertaining to all of us, even the people who hate them, especially the people who hate them.
Yeah, same here.
They're
I don't
especially
like
entertained by them.
Entertaining.
Yes. All right, can't help but agree. In somewhat related news, China has officially joined a global vaccine initiative for distributing 2 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines around the world by the end of the next year, according to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua Chunying said on Friday that Beijing had joined the initiative known as COVAX. That would make China the largest economy to join that coalition, which is aimed at countering so-called vaccine nationalism. The U.S. has said that it would not join the alliance, calling it constraining and overly influenced by the World Health Organization and China. Beijing had initially missed the deadline for joining that initiative, which is again co-led by the World Health Organization, along with Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovations. The goal of the alliance is to get as many as 100. This is a little bit of a confusing sentence, I'm going to admit. The goal of the alliance is to get as many as they can of 171 countries to provide COVID-19 vaccines to a targeted 3% of each participating country's most at-risk population by sharing the costs of research and distribution among both the developed and developing countries. So we'll see how that goes. In Kyrgyzstan, the president of Kyrgyzstan has said he's willing to step down as soon as new elections are held. And breaking this morning, that president has also declared a state of emergency in the capital, Bishkek. Opposition groups have quarreled among themselves since seizing government buildings and forcing the cancellation of election results earlier this week. The opposition is divided among 11 parties, which represent clan interests in a country that has already seen 2 presidents toppled by popular revolts since 2005. Thousands of their followers took to the streets at rival rallies that politicians said posed a danger of violence. Russia has described the situation in Kyrgyzstan, which borders China and hosts a Russian military base, as, quote, a mess and chaos, end quote. In a first step towards consolidating the 2 rival candidates for the premiership, Omurbek Babanov and Tilek Toktogaziev, said on Friday they would work together, with the latter becoming a deputy prime minister. They were backed by 4 parties, a local news website reported. A third candidate, Sadir Zaporov, backed by the Atazert party, had yet to comment on their move, and 6 other opposition parties had yet to make their positions clear. Babanov, he would again be the prime, either the upcoming premiership or the prime minister, I believe. Babanov said President Zhinbekov could avoid impeachment, which would leave him vulnerable to subsequent prosecution if he quit after signing off on a new cabinet lineup. And again, President Zhinbekov has since said he would do exactly that. And as of this morning, he has just declared a state of emergency in the capital of Kyrgyzstan, Bishkek. By the way, Jamarl, as you know, we're planning on talking about this and other, conflicts on the former Soviet periphery. Those would be in Belarus, Nagorno-Karabakh. We're going to be talking about that, I believe, with Peter Lavelle in about half an hour.
Yeah.
So for those listening, stay tuned. Should be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, Peter should be a great person to talk to about that. We kind of mentioned that this morning. There seems to be a destabilization on old Soviet territories. And it seems to be happening all at once. Now, to be fair, you can make an argument that there seems to be a destabilization in American territories also, which mean in the United States.
Destabilization all over the world.
Right, and that's what I was about to say. Maybe we're looking at this wrong. Maybe the way to look at it is this seems to be endemic all over the place. So maybe it's just happenstance. And maybe it's our perch, here at Radio Sputnik that kind of gives us more of a acute eye on that stuff. But it does seem to be this kind of crumbling of these states. Belarus was stable. So this should be a really good conversation with Peter Lavelle. And like you said, we're calling it Putin's plate is full on this one, because he is being a mediator like nobody's business to try to quell much of this stuff.
Absolutely. And by the way, just to bring in, this actually segues pretty well into the next headline. A lot of civil unrest in Thailand too right now. We're getting into that in just a second. More global political censorship by the U.S. and U.S. companies after Facebook moved on Tuesday to ban all accounts linked to the QAnon conspiracy theory. That, by the way, is a theory that says President Trump is waging a war against elite Satan-worshipping pedophiles. Now, Twitter has announced that it has suspended 926 accounts based in Thailand for partaking in coordinated information operations on behalf of the Thai military. The announcement comes in the midst of a gathering protest movement within Thailand, which is pushing for the resignation of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, the drafting of a new constitution, and most explosively calls for reform of the Thai monarchy. This comes as the U.S. Justice Department, in a separate story, seized 92 websites it said were used by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to spread disinformation. The department said on Wednesday that 4 of the websites were disguised as genuine news outlets based in the U.S., while the others had been, quote, spreading Iranian propaganda online, end quote. I want to dig into that more. This last story here was pretty underreported. I only found that this morning, and I hadn't seen this popping up many places else. I have some questions about how they did that. Were these websites registered in the U.S., or did the Justice Department just sort of seize them from the international holders? We should get into maybe ICANN and how domain registration works. That's a little bit murky and off topic, but hey, if it's relevant to this, it might be good to dissect it for just a second. I just find it ridiculous, though. I'll just quote this again. It sees 92 websites it says were used by Iran's IRGC, but only 4 of those, even if you're going to take this as justification, that if they're disguised, whatever that means, as genuine news outlets, whatever that means. I don't know that that many news outlets in the U.S. are genuine at this point. If they seized 4 of the websites on that count, why did they seize the other 88? If they're just working internationally, if they're just spreading Iran's opinion, I mean, we've got Radio Free Europe, we've got Radio Free Liberty, whatever it's called now. We've got our outlets. The BBC exists. I mean, heck, a bunch of different countries have different outlets in different countries. What gives us the right to keep them from talking online? What's your take, Jamarl?
Power. I told you, it's not about right or wrong. It's about power. Iran has a point of view. That point of view could be absolutely flat, fact, true. And it wouldn't matter one iota. Because from the standpoint of the United States, and from the standpoint of the companies that work in the United States, it is contrary to our own. That's the answer. There is nothing else there. There is no right, wrong, ethics, and all of that. That's a conceptual plane. But what people realize is, yeah, that's a conceptual plane, but in real terms, what can we do to shut them up because we don't like what they say? Oh, that's right. We have the mechanisms to do it, so they do it. Don't get me wrong. Iran is, giving their story in their part of the world. And so if you're in Russia or China or some of the other countries abroad, you'll hear their point of view. But in the U.S. or maybe even in parts of Europe, yeah, if it gets to it where we don't like what you're saying because you're contesting what we're saying, yeah, they'll shut them up. That's what I mean when I make the point about the whole right, wrong, conceptual stuff. It really boils down in many respects to who has leverage, who has power, and how can you use that to your advantage to squelch other people's point of view, but expand your own. Think of our country for the moment. Give it international politics. Think of what you do or what we do in our own politics. Why do you think they shut polling locations? Or why do you think they make the voting lines longer? So you're standing in that line for 5-6 hours just to make a vote. Or why do you think the media didn't cover Sanders? Or, it's like they do these things in order to either expand a particular point of view or contract a point of view, and to keep people within a frame of mind of of barriers, of limits. That way they don't ask too many questions. That's the way I see it.
I'm going to paraphrase this one. But Jamarl, at one point I heard a cynic characterized as a romantic who's fallen out of love with love or has been betrayed by love. I feel like that's why you're a cynic, man. I feel like at one point earlier in your life, and even still now burning in the inner chambers of your heart, you feel a desire to live in a world that is mediated by ethics and not by politics. And I do too.
Why do you think I use a rational argument? Why do you think I say...
Let's come back to this.
Yeah.
Let's come back to this. I want to wrap the headlines. Maybe 9:45, or maybe we can do the thing we were talking about in our post-show meeting yesterday. If we get that set up and start teasing it out to the audience. Anyway, with that as a cliffhanger, my last headline here: Hurricane Delta is due to make landfall today with top sustained winds of 120 miles per hour while it is offshore. Expected to weaken as it nears the Gulf Coast and then weaken rapidly after it comes ashore. Many residents of barrier islands have moved inland ahead of the arrival of the hurricane. And with that, you've listened to to headlines on Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And you know what? We're going to go into a break right now. We will be back in a minute with Jamarl's monologue. Until then, enjoy tips on what other shows you can listen to on this network. We'll be back in just a second. Fault Line, Stranahan.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station from DC. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us the like and give us the share. Also, if you want to get into the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. We don't typically bite, so definitely don't be shy. Give us a call. And by the way, the format has changed, but we are still taking calls. 13 people were charged in a plot to take down Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. Now, keep in mind, once before, there were people who raided the Capitol and were with guns and whatnot, these militia groups just showing off their guns, walking around, look at my weapon, look at my weapon. No response to that. I've seen cases where cops roll into neighborhoods with trucks and military vehicles and, rolling around in there, playing soldier. But no response to the raiding of the Capitol. That seems problematic because, in my head, just from the standpoint of the way power distribution works, the moment that you allow something like that to take place, you set the pretext for it to happen again. 13 charged in plot to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Let's hear Donald Trump, when pushed to confront terrorist groups, not do so. Let's play the clip. This was at the debate.
But are you willing tonight to condemn white supremacists and militia groups and to say that they need to stand down and not add to the violence in a number of these cities, as we saw in Kenosha and as we've seen in Portland?
Sure,
are you
I'm willing
prepared to
do
specifically
that, but
do it? Well,
I would say almost everything I see is from the left wing, not from the right wing.
So what are you saying?
I'm willing to do anything. I want to see peace.
Then do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it. You want to call them? What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
white
name.
Supremacists and
white
supremacists and right
Proud Boys. Stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left, because this is not a right-wing problem. This is a left-wing. This is a left-wing problem.
White supremacists. Antifa's an idea, not an organization.
Oh, you got it.
Not militia. That's what his FBI. His FBI director said.
Well, then you know what?
No, we're done, sir. We're moving on to the next. We're moving.
His own FBI director said that basically Joe Biden's right. Antifa is an idea, it's a response. It's not an inciting factor per se. And in this very specific case, where they asked Donald Trump, would you condemn white supremacists? He wouldn't do it. Now, the very act of asking him to do it may be a reason that he's pushing back against it, but I suspect that he knows that a lot of that is his base, and they responded to it as such, recognizing, saying, that this was one of those things. It was like, whoa, we got recognized by the President of the United States in one of the main debates. Here's a report. This came out, I think it was a few months ago, but it's the escalating terrorism problem in the United States. CIS analyzes 25 years of domestic terrorism incidents and finds that the majority of attacks and plots have come from the right. The report says the majority of all terrorist incidents in the United States since 1994 and the total number of right-wing attacks and plots have grown significantly during the past 6 years, with the far right launching 2/3 of attacks and plots from 2019 and 90% of those in 2020. The report adds that far-right terrorism has significantly outpaced terrorism from other types of perpetrators. The second most significant source of attacks and plots in the United States has been religious extremists, almost all Salafi jihadists inspired by Islamic State and Al-Qaeda. The report shows that far left has been an increasingly negligible source of attacks since the mid-2000s, and the time the FBI defined arson and other forms of property damage as domestic terrorism during periods have been called, the Green Scare. My point I'm making here is 90% of the terrorism that has taken place in 2020 has been from the far right. It is clear, it is understood, and this attack, potential attack, where they wanted to literally start a civil war, fits within the context of that. The idea that people will be screaming, oh, Antifa, using that as a buzzword in order to cover and hide what is the issue here, far-right terrorism. And let's be very clear, it does flow from the top. When Bill Cosby was on television and you saw a black doctor, you saw a black lawyer, and you saw all of these beautiful kids, what happened? You had a rush of people, African Americans, going to schools. When you saw the Harlem Renaissance and what they said, quote unquote, Negroes were in vogue, and you had this thing where people were like, oh my God, they can think, they have the passion and all of this other stuff, and people had this understanding that people could think. Meaning the very thing that comes from the top and the image that is set from those things does have an effect. Let's not be quaint. And the President of the United States running around screaming about masks being against liberty and all of this other nonsense. And you have a president that basically backs this stuff. And you have a president with a friend that's a nationalist, Stephen Miller, who just caught COVID. And the president gets on the debate stage and would not condemn right-wing groups. And what do you know? Here's a right-wing group that tried to take down the governor of the state. And again, whatever you want to say about Antifa, you need to understand something. If you lived in a different society where people weren't impoverished, where people could get health care when they needed it, get an education when they needed it, they had parents that weren't impoverished, that had the things that they need, that had the time to be able to dedicate to them, your world would be fundamentally different. You don't have that world. You have chaos, and you have inequities, you have things that people have difficulties dealing with, and so you have chaos. The chaos that you get is a response to the society itself. The white nationalist groups that has decided to descend upon that chaos, something else. And you may call it, yes, there may be a response. Yes, there may be this feeling that their power is going down. Let's say we were at a 10 and now somebody else is coming up to a 7, so it feels like a diminishment of our power, so we need to take the state. Whatever the rationale they're coming up with, the idea that you're trying to start a civil war and a president that tacitly gives approval to it by non-committal. And here's one last point, and I'll end it here. The election, the most terrifying day that is going to take place in this year is going to take place in November. And that is at the end of that election when that number is called. And you're going to have a segment of the people that may not accept it depending upon what Donald Trump says or does. This notion of handing over of power is going to get sketchy for the first time in a very, very long time. Buckle up, America. This Wolverine group might just be the beginning. Shane, what do you think? Am I being too strong on this? Am I being too overreactive in regards to looking at this? Or is this problematic, to put it mildly.
I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to quote from Trump here directly. This is from his Twitter feed, spread across 3 tweets. I'm just going to read it verbatim. Governor Whitmer of Michigan has done a terrible job. She locked down her state for everyone except her husband's boating activities. The federal government provided tremendous help to the great people of Michigan. My Justice Department and federal law enforcement announced today that they foiled a dangerous plot against the governor of Michigan. Rather than say thank you, she calls me a white supremacist, while Biden and Democrats refuse to condemn Antifa, anarchists, looters, and mobs that burn down Democrat-run cities. I do not tolerate any extreme violence. Defending all Americans, even those who oppose and attack me, is what I will always do as your president. Governor Whitmer, open up your state, open up your schools, and open up your churches. End quote. So the first thing that strikes me there, I just want to highlight this, is how bad this makes me feel about President Trump. He first goes after Governor Whitmer. He doesn't express any concern or sympathy or anything like that. Granted, he's been waging a rhetorical war with her for months now. So, you know, this kind of animosity is in the character of that war. But yet, you know, he should at least open by showing some sympathy, not apology necessarily, but some sympathy. But here's the other side of it, Jamarl. I mean, you said that you were quoting the former FBI director, I believe, saying that Antifa is an idea, not a movement. As far as I can tell, you can say literally exactly the same thing about Boogaloo. You know, like the quote unquote right wing pro gun. I mean, it is right wing militia group. They are also, as far as I can tell, a movement, also with a dress code, without leadership, without any kind of, you know, consolidated leadership. They're just newer, and they're on the right. And it seems like people are therefore more willing to label them, you know, a movement with an organized leadership or something. There's this like weird equivocation. I guess here's where I'm going with this stuff. I don't like any of them, as far as I can tell. Both Antifa, in the sense in which many people have come to know it, not in the, you know, sort of generic anti-fascist sense, which I think many people would agree with. The specific sense of this recognizable movement who acts in specific ways, destroys public property, and is occasionally violent towards law enforcement officers and even other people on the streets. I don't like that. That doesn't seem healthy for our society. I also don't like Boogaloo. I don't have any real fondness for the Proud Boys. These seem like they just getting into fights with Antifa. That seems to be the main thing, is like they're the one side of the violent wrestling match we have on our streets in this country. Why do you think
those things come to pass?
But Antifa is on the other side.
Why do you think those groups come to pass?
So I can put it in your terms. They're both a response to the prevailing political system and the prevailing political system's responses to, you know, society and the public and the public's needs. Yeah, I mean, that's the extremely broad term. I don't think either of them are ethically justified, though. And I guess here's where I would go. If you're going to condemn if you're going to condemn right-wing militias, who again, admittedly, very, very much admittedly, it appears that this group is right-wing. Everything that I'm seeing is suggesting that. It appears that some of them are also anarchists, however, supporting anarchist flags in the backgrounds of videos that they posted online. You can see that if you go looking around. This is another brief note. Anarchists aren't just on the left. There are plenty of anarchists on the right. It seems like these folks are accelerationists. They're trying to sort of accelerate the decline of America, through civil war, through civil unrest, in order to bring something out on the other side. I don't like that political philosophy. I think that political philosophy is inherently, not just inherently dangerous, but it's like, okay, you blow up the state, you use that bombshell, whatever. What comes in the wreckage?
Right.
It's not like
right.
Those kinds of institutions don't come back like phoenixes. Individual people can, maybe small groups of people, if they go through a process of introspection and self-criticism and self-support, and they come up with some better way of doing things, then they can make progress. But I don't see that. That's my final take. What's your take? We've only got about a minute.
I think the interesting question is moral justification or ethical justification for it. And maybe that's a different conversation that we should have. But like you said, we in 1 minute, we're not going to have that conversation. So let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to The Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And our guest for this segment and the next, Peter Lavelle, host of Crosstalk on RT and American journalist. Peter, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
It's a pleasure to be with you. It's always a pleasure to be with you. I'm a bit overcast. Winter is on its way. No surprise. It's October.
It's great to have you. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. I'm sad to hear it's overcast, but like you're saying, that is seasonal. And this is my own little thing. I really want to travel to Moscow, not just Moscow, but also St. Petersburg at some point. I mean, that's, again, admittedly a bit of field here, but just responding to that. Here's what we brought you on to talk about. Right up front, I'm going to ask you, I hear you have a new show out. I hear you on YouTube, you have a new platform. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Peter?
Yeah, it's called The Gaggle, and I've set it up with a friend of mine, George Samueli, and a colleague that works with me at RT. Her name is Kira Haley, and the three of us just do kind of very topical things like you guys do. I mean, I'm very happy and content with Crosstalk, but I still have more to say, and one of the reasons why I come on your radio program. So just to keep the conversation going, I like to kind of reach across and talk to progressives primarily, not to conservatives, because I already know what they think. And so I'm really trying to reach out to people that think differently than I do. And it's very cordial and it's very enlightening.
That's awesome. That's great to hear.
Well, I'm a lefty, and so I guess I'm one of those people you're trying to talk to. I've always enjoyed my conversation with you, and I even enjoy your show. So if it's a conservative's point of view, it's a rational one, if I want to call it that, or at the very least a sane one. Did you watch the debates here in the States? I wasn't sure if you watched the first debate. It may end up being the last debate, depending upon how these guys work this out. But which one of these guys is going to save America?
I watched the first debate, and I quickly realized, as Chris Wallace was going along, that, well, this is going to be an experience. So I got the ironing board out, and I ironed shirts, and I fed my dogs, cleaned the dishes. It was. I didn't get anything out of it, okay, and I don't think anybody else did really either. And I thought it was a self-inflicted wound on Trump's fault. He was debating against two people, Chris Wallace and Joe Biden, and Trump should have just let Biden speak, because if you guys have noticed, Biden only has 3 or 4 sentences in him. You cut him off in the first half of the first one, it looks like you're holding him back. Well, Joe Biden doesn't have much to say. So Trump made a cardinal error. Now, on the vice presidential debate, I don't know. We got what we would have expected from Mike Pence. You got to realize he was a radio talk show guy. He knows how to do it. Okay, and I was disappointed that he had to ask questions of Kamala Harris when she wouldn't answer it from the moderator. Like, are you going to pack the court? I'd like to know the answer to that, okay? And much other. Kamala Harris reminded me of a substitute school teacher. That's about the level of her expertise on that stage, in my opinion.
That is a great characterization. Here's the thing. Responding to what you were saying about the first debate, I can't help but agree. From within the first 10 minutes, when Trump went basically toe-to-toe with Chris Wallace, that trend obviously continued throughout the whole thing. I think that was, if anything, that was what made it particularly difficult to watch. And I say this as somebody who, by and large, fell more on the side of Trump in that debate in terms of the topics, in terms of the points that he was making, than I did on Biden's side. Why do you think it's just emotionalism? I mean, do you think it's just he's out of control, or why do you think he made that mistake? Is it just his character, Peter?
If you compare it to 2016, Trump had an amazing knack to control the narrative. I mean, he really was. It was always determining what the next news cycle was about. And he's, as president, it is not as easy to do that because, when he was a candidate, he can do things off the fly. And now he's head of government. I mean, my goodness. I mean, having to have to he was not able to express himself the same way as a candidate and as president. And so I think that, he wanted to grab back the attention. And I think he did it in the most ghastly way because he didn't convince his supporters completely agreed with him. He didn't change anybody's mind. He needs to change minds. He needs people, independents primarily, to vote for him because his base is going to stay with him no matter what he says and no matter what he does, okay? So he needed to reach out more. But if you look at the content, I read the transcript. Trump was factually correct, much more correct than Joe Biden. As a matter of fact, Joe Biden threw out these, the Taliban and these bounty hunters and all of this, which has completely been debunked, okay? Then he invoked Russiagate again. So Trump should have just let Biden speak. And then I think you would have said, do you really want this guy as president? But if you gag him, it looks like you're missing out of something he could have said. So Trump he blew it. Sorry.
And with the double tragedy of getting infected with COVID because he didn't want to wear a mask. And now they can say this is going to be a virtual debate. And Trump is stuck saying, I'm not going to do that debate, which means that the debates that he needs to move the needle in a particular direction, and like you say, to let Biden talk, well, you don't get that opportunity unless Biden goes to the town hall. And at that point, it's a different conversation. It's not a debate anymore. It's just a town hall. Peter, I do want to move on to something you said, the Russiagate documents. Go ahead.
Sorry. Who's going to control the mute button, though? Who's going to control the mute button?
Agree. No, I agree with Trump on this. I totally agree with Trump. I don't think that I wouldn't accept the virtual debate. I mean, I wouldn't accept that either. That's not his strength. His strength is presence, mood, those type of things. And I don't think you could do that in a virtual debate. And like you said, it looks crazy when Trump is in the background moving around and he's muted. So,
I think we're at the stage right now where that was a shot across the bow. I don't think the decision on the second debate, if it's going to happen, has been completely made. Okay, so because the committee that does the debates, they just made this statement. Now I don't know what coordination they have with the Biden campaign. I don't want to speculate about that, but it's now for the campaigns to come back and say what they think. Okay, so I don't think we should write off a second debate completely.
I don't think we should. We'll see where it comes, though. I mean, there are also, of course, concerns, I'm sure, on Trump's end that if Biden does this electronically, he will be getting mid-debate coaching practically. I don't know if there are any, policies that can prevent that. But actually, if it's cool with you, I kind of wanted to segue into another big story from this week, a little bit more timely, the release of the Russiagate docs. So Trump on Twitter called for the unredacted release of those documents. Ratcliffe, the director of national intelligence, released the documents, but they were, of course, heavily redacted. What do you think the significance of this release is during not only the electoral cycle, but also the wider saga of the Russiagate hoax? Peter, what's your opinion?
What's really ironic about all of this is that for 3.5 years, you had the Democrats and the liberal media pushing the story, and people became sick of it. If you look at some of the recent Gallup polls that came out of the last couple of days, Russiagate is like 48th out of 100 or something like that. I mean, just really, really low. And Trump is trying to resurrect it. He should have released these documents when he said he wanted to do them back in 2017. It's a day late and a buck short. I mean, you really, really need a bombshell for people to reconsider that story. They've already made up their mind on that story. So this looks like panicking. It looks like the Trump campaign is panicking. Signing this executive order on pharmaceuticals, which has no real legal basis. I mean, Congress has to pay for it. These stimulus negotiations, when he abruptly
pulls out of them. I know we all know Pelosi's playing a game right there, but the closer we get to the election, the more panicky the campaign looks, and that doesn't exude the kind of strength that Trump likes to show.
I think the catch
people
is
like myself are very interested in those documents, very interested in, because it confirms what my opinion, my assessment that I had 3 years ago. I've been proven right every step of the way. But does it matter anymore? Does it really matter? And I think that's really tragic, because a lot of people did some very terrible things, even illegal things, and they probably will get away with it.
It does seem panicky. I mean, but I couldn't tell if it was a president that was embarrassed coming out of the hospital. That's the way I framed it. Because if you think about it, Trump's main thing is, I'm an alpha male, I'm the big dog, I'm the big guy. And you have a situation where that alpha male who thought wearing masks was unmanly gets infected with COVID-19 and has to go to the hospital. And then comes back and gets into a Twitter fight with Facebook and Twitter. Like you said, abruptly pulls out of negotiations, only to sheepishly put his toe back in it a little bit later. And it doesn't look, like you said, it doesn't look presidential, and it does look panicky. But I got to be honest, this looks like a president that is about to lose a race, and that knows, or at the very least fully thinks he's about to lose a race. What do you think could have been done differently in this? I mean, because it sounds like you're saying that, look, this could have been a fundamentally different reality in regards to going into this election right now.
Well, contrary to what a lot of people say, I think the Trump administration has more or less done a decent job when it comes to COVID, because I look at how other governments have dealt with it, and I would say the U.S. is kind of in the middle in the response. The problem is the optics of it. See, what Trump needed to do at the very, very beginning, once they realized the magnitude of this, affecting in a very deadly way a very, very small part of the population, but it's deadly nonetheless. He should have come out and articulated that very clearly to the American people. And a lot of his surrogates are awful in speaking on his behalf. And number two, and I think the second half of that is the reaction to the collapse of the economy. When you look at mainstream media, particularly the liberal media, they're not affected by this at all. They have no idea what's going on in the average life of average Americans, about not being able to pay your mortgage, losing your job if you're in the gig economy. Tens of millions of people have been affected. The president hasn't addressed that issue. He should have, and I think I've said this on your program before, he should have gone left of Joe Biden, and he should have shamed the Republicans in the Senate to get a stimulus package that affect for people that are working people and middle class people, because the rich and powerful were already fed at the trough. They got concierge service. Okay, well, what about the average American? And Trump could have hit the ball out of the park on that one by addressing the pandemic and together addressing the economic decline of the middle class. And I think he would be way up in the polls. It is a mystery to me why it's not a mystery to me, because he's got all of these ridiculous, backward-looking, pig-headed libertarians around him, okay? They say, oh, no, we can't, the budget. Oh, come on, you got tons of money for rich people. Can we have a little bit of money for the middle class and working people? Trump muffed that one big time. If he had done the two things that I have just mentioned, it would be a walk in the park for him.
And sadly, I mean, Trump, as Jamarl was just saying, Trump seems to like to come across as a strong man, not necessarily a strong man leader in the usual, political science sense of the term, but as a strong man simply. But yet, at least on these two key stories we've just covered, on Russiagate and on COVID, he waited and waited, he dilly-dallied, he apparently dathered, and nothing really happened. And of course, nothing much happened from his end. And of course, those crises grew unabated. The Russiagate story was kept on life support for years, brought back in 2020 with the impeachment scandal as a part of that wider set of results. And now, of course, going into the 2020 election, attacks on Russia specifically are flaring up again. And again, in the case of the pandemic, if he had acted decisively, not only economically, but in terms of, pushing out relief on his end, the Defense Authorization Act, for instance, if he wanted to do that, not just for producing ventilators, but masks, a wide array of these things. He could have done, any president could have done a bunch more in advance. And I don't want to level too many criticisms on Trump for his handling of this. But at the same time, if he had done that, if like you're saying, he had come out with a progressive economic program, you actually might have seen, this is a little bit controversial, but you might have seen one of those polar shifts in the parties where the Republican Party becomes an anti-war party, a party that stands for workers' rights, for economic mobilization, for even a return to manufacturing, jobs programs, those kinds of things. And in any event, Peter, we've got to go into a break right now. We will be back on the other side talking about foreign policy. We can also get back into this. I don't want to cut you off without giving you a chance to respond. We will be back in just a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, joined by our guest, Peter Lavelle, host of Crosstalk on RT. We will be back with him on the other side of this break.
Fault Lines.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C. or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Achtung, baby.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan from the capital of the world, Washington, D.C. We have with us Peter Lavelle, journalist and host of Crosstalk on RT. Peter, we were having a conversation. I wanted to give you a moment to respond to what Shane was saying. We don't want to cut you off before giving your response.
What was the question?
Go ahead, Shane. What was the thrust of your question in order to?
We can get straight into it. We can get straight into the foreign policy stuff that we plan to talk about. I was making some claims and I heard Peter starting to talk in response as we were going into the break. But anyway, we can move on.
That's the reality of a hard break.
Exactly.
That's right. Right.
Absolutely.
So let's do this. Let's move into foreign policy.
Go for it,
I've been fascinated by this, if I'm being bluntly honest. As soon as we started covering the story, the Nagorno-Karabakh story, Armenia and Azerbaijan. You are on RT, and so you get the opportunity to cover this story, just like we get the opportunity to cover this story. And mainstream media, for the most part, doesn't seem to have grasped the significance and the gravity of what is taking place there. How do you perceive this? I mean, basically, you have one country, Armenia, saying this is an issue of independence. So you have another country, Azerbaijan, basically saying, no, this is not an issue of independence. This is our land and our territory. How do you square this circle, Peter?
Well, it's really a historical problem. And this is really one of the living legacies of Stalin and his nationality policy for the Soviet Union. What he wanted to do is he wanted to make sure that, there are many, many different ethnic groups. There were many inside of the Soviet Union, some smaller, some bigger, some more powerful and more influential. And what Stalin did was essentially draw maps and borders to create tension between different ethnic groups, which later they would all turn to Moscow to have mediated. And that's exactly what happened. But when the Soviet Union was coming to an end, the rivalry between Azerbaijan and Armenia flared up because in Nagorno-Karabakh, that is a majority Armenian population. And since Moscow wasn't going to intervene in the late 1980s, early 90s, because of all the political shifts with seeing the end of the Soviet Union, this conflict was able to flare up. And the initial conflict as the Soviet Union was collapsing, the Armenians made out, okay, and they were able to control Nagorno-Karabakh. But internationally, even Russia does not recognize the independence of Nagorno-Karabakh. It recognizes Azerbaijan's territorial borders, and no country in the world recognizes Nagorno-Karabakh as being anything different from Azerbaijan. What the problem, one of the reasons why it's not reported on is they don't see the anti-Russia angle, and so if there's no anti-Russia angle, why report on it? That's why it doesn't make it into the headlines. But it is very important because Armenia is a strategic ally of Russia, and Russia has treaty obligations that if the security of Armenia is threatened, that they have to intervene. The last thing Vladimir Putin wants to do right now is get involved in Nagorno-Karabakh, because that's why we call it a frozen conflict. There is no real answer to the problem, okay? And so having it frozen is the best outcome. And you have Azerbaijan that is far more wealthy than Armenia because of its oil. My supposition is that they thought that their military was strong enough, and Erdogan entering the scene like a bull in a china shop. I mean, his role in this has been deplorable. And so Azerbaijan thought that they might be able to make a quick victory. Well, no. And as we speak right now, talks are being finally organized in Moscow for Armenia and Azerbaijan to come to Moscow and to see what's the next step forward. Russia's playing the diplomat again.
Yes, Russia's playing the diplomat. And frenemy Turkey is pushing this. Like, it's so strange to me. Turkey accepted Russian missiles at one point, and this was to the chagrin of the United States. And it's kind of, it's this notion of I'm going to play one against the other of sorts that Turkey is doing. But they've taken a belligerent stance in that region. And now it seems like they are whispering in the ear of Azerbaijan with this notion of, hey, you can take this. And, how is Turkey, let's get into that part, the role of Turkey in this. And the role, what are they to get out of this by being this close to Azerbaijan and kind of pushing them to get this territory? What are their expectations in regards to territorial gains? Because I don't think they would be an ally like this. And I got to be honest, I agree with Bashar al-Assad. I think they're instigators. But if they are, what are they to get out of this particular conflict?
Over the last week, I've been asked numerous times, why is he doing this? Why is Erdogan doing this? And I have an answer, but it won't be satisfactory, I'm afraid. He does it because he can. Because the downside is there isn't enough downside to deter him from his escapades in Syria and in Libya, and now with Nagorno-Karabakh. And I always tell people, when the end game is coming, when Putin summons Erdogan to his private residence in Sochi and basically takes him to the woodshed again. And that's essentially what's going to happen here. Why does he do it? Is it because of neo-Ottomanism? Is he doing it for support back home? He fancies himself as the great player in the international bazaar. And, I sometimes think Erdogan thinks that he can meet with Putin and we can resolve all of these issues, Azerbaijan and Syria and Libya, in one swift action and all that. That's very misguided. But Erdogan he thinks of himself as Bismarck or something like that on the international stage. He gets very few dividends from his behavior, by the way.
Where do you think that false confidence comes from, Peter?
Because he knows that the Americans won't. They want Turkey to stay in NATO. That's very, very important. And why the Russians put up with it? Well, like you said, they buy some military equipment. And from a Russian geopolitical standpoint, watching the Americans, pull their hair out over Erdogan puts a smile on everyone's face in the Kremlin because there's discord inside of NATO. And at the end of the day, Erdogan is Turkey, just because of its location and its size and its economy, naturally is a regional power. And it's going to have to find its place in the region. The problem is NATO membership that Turkey has, and American overreach in the Middle East. That overreach is coming to an end one way or another, sooner or later, and Turkey is still going to be there. And so that's why Erdogan thinks he can take these risks, because he knows that the Russians don't want to go to war with him. And that's the last thing in the Kremlin's mind. And the Americans need Turkey for its geopolitical position, not because Erdogan is there. I mean, the number of American officials privately say, we got to get rid of Turkey. But there's always this pushback because of its location. So Erdogan is able to cause a lot of mischief because there's not enough pushback for his bad behavior.
And yet, as we've been talking about on the show recently, NATO, I mean, largely due to the increasingly incompetent influence of the United States, NATO is sclerotic. It's not like people don't see, we're not anticipating NATO joining in on this conflict if Russia needs to step in, God forbid, militarily, I mean. That false confidence that you're referring to, will that come to an end? As NATO seems to be in decline, as the United States' role and intentions, depending on the outcome of this presidential election and the next couple of elections, as its influence in the region seems to be abating, how do you think that's going to affect where Erdogan stands and where he believes he can go in the region, Peter?
Well, everybody in the Middle East, and I'll say the greater Middle East, but throw in Turkey and Iran, is everyone's looking at the decline of American power in the region and how they're going to have to deal with it. It would be a good thing, a very good thing for so many reasons for the U.S. to get out of the Middle East. And of course, my dream is to see the end of NATO and the reconstitution of European security, which would include Russia. But, with that drawdown, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, I would even throw in Pakistan, are going to have to sit down at a big round table, and they're going to have to suss out what the region is going to be about and what direction it's going to do. Because the United States is an impediment. It retards what needs to be done, dealing with good governance. I mean, when you're a client state, you get away with anything and everything. But when you don't have that crutch, you have to start thinking differently about your security. This agreements, this quote unquote peace agreement, which it wasn't a peace agreement, with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and Israel. Well, they weren't at war, so you can't use the term peace. But this is the neocons again finding another reason to stay in the Middle East, because these huge military contracts, American personnel have to stay in the region. They have to teach the soldiers on the ground how to use them. They have to monitor their use. It's just another excuse to stay in that quagmire called the Middle East. Once the U.S. leaves, and it will, then you're going to see statesmanship and diplomacy come to the fore. And I guarantee you that will happen, okay? And Israel will have to come to terms living in that region. Only good things can come about this. Only good things. The U.S. must get out of the Middle East, and then peace will come to that region. I'm not saying wars won't happen, but in the longer term, that is best for the region.
You guys are listening to the voice of Peter Lavelle, journalist and host of Crosstalk on RT. Peter, where can people find your content?
Well, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, on YouTube, and 3 times a week. You can go to RT and see Crosstalk, and there is so much news to cover. It's very difficult to choose the topics.
It is, and it's.
How about your new channel, real quick, just in closing, Peter? Where can people find your new YouTube channel?
It's called The Gaggle with Peter Lavelle, and I started it at the very end of August. We've got like 120 videos up, and they're primarily interviews with third persons. My partner on the site, George Samueli, we kind of trade off. And like I said, we reach across the aisle. And anyone here listening, I ask you to take a look at it and even contact us. And I'm very open to content ideas.
That was the voice of Peter Lavelle, host of Crosstalk on RT and the founder of The Gaggle with Peter Lavelle. We will be back in 1 minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. Back with headlines on the other side of this break.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever-vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the politically independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to some headlines. In the news, 6 men are under arrest on federal charges that they plotted to kill Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, while 7 men are under arrest for plotting to storm Michigan's Capitol building to start a civil war. Governor Whitmer and former Vice President Joe Biden suggested that President Trump's rhetoric played a role. 7 of the men either founded or were affiliated with a self-styled militia calling themselves the Wolverine Watchmen. The Wolverine Watchmen. Michigan is nicknamed the Wolverine State for its one-time abundance of Wolverines. The 7 men were charged with state crimes, which carry penalties of 2 to 20 years in prison. The state's Attorney General, Dana Nessel, accused them of collecting addresses of police officers in order to target them, threatening to start a civil war, quote-unquote, leading to societal collapse, and planning to kidnap the governor and other governmental officials. Armenia and Azerbaijan have confirmed that their foreign ministers will come for talks to Moscow. This will mark the first time that they've both shown a real willingness to discuss a ceasefire. Azerbaijan confirmed that Foreign Minister Juan Bamarov will take part in talks in Moscow, and Azeri and ethnic Armenian forces clashed again over Nagorno-Karabakh. Fighting in Nagorno-Karabakh has continued for a second week as Armenia and Azerbaijan battle over the breakaway region. We are now on day 13 of those clashes. So far, the two rivals are ignoring international appeals for a ceasefire and have accused one another of causing civilian and military casualties since clashing on September 27th. President Trump's re-election campaign says the Biden campaign should stick to their original debate schedule. The two were supposed to meet next week for a second debate in Miami. However, the commission responsible for debate said that they should switch to a virtual debate due to the president's coronavirus infection. The president said he's not willing to attend a debate virtually. Biden campaign then said that if they weren't doing the debate that night, that he'd host a town hall to be moderated by George Stephanopoulos. Trump has continued the call for a debate to be held in person, with the campaign manager citing Trump's doctor, as he said there was no medical reason why the Commission on Presidential Debate should shift the debate virtual setting, or postpone it, or otherwise alter it in any way. The date of the upcoming debate is still uncertain. Shane, this is bizarre to me. A man who got infected with COVID-19 is saying, I want to have a debate in person. The other elderly man, who is a wisp of a man that he was, and if a hard wind hit him, looks like he'll fall over, is basically saying, yeah, no, I'm not going to be in person with you if there's any chance at all that you're infected, and I don't trust the word that's coming out of your mouth. How do you square this? I mean, Trump, I got to be honest, it's unreasonable to ask Joe Biden to stand with him in an auditorium to have a debate in person after testing positive for COVID. Am I wrong on that? Or, like, I guess the problem here is, you have to trust that the test result got it right. You got to trust that Donald Trump is being honest. You have to trust a lot of stuff. And if you're Joe Biden, do you take that trust?
It's not in the interest of either to accept the terms that the other's given. That's just a political thing here, and that's why it's an embarrassing debacle for us to be living through and commentating on. You referenced, how do you square this? That's a reference to squaring the circle. This is not a circle. This is like a helix bent in on itself many times over. I can't cut this. It's no longer a Gordian knot. It's just a confused morass of conflicting opinions. The one side of this here that I'm going to briefly, we haven't talked about this morning. We were talking about this earlier this week. If Trump has fully recovered, as his doctor is saying, if he's off of basically the entirety of the cocktail he was receiving, it can only apparently, despite his obesity and brought into special light by his obesity, which is, a major contributing factor, a major comorbidity with suffering the worst effects of COVID-19. If he's recovered, it's because he got that cocktail of drugs. And that should lead us to wonder, out of the several 100,000 people in America alone who have died, why weren't they given access to that treatment? Why is our FDA, why are the various administrations responsible for administering this stuff? Why aren't they looking a lot harder at saving more American lives by, doing more testing, more statistical analyses of how these medicines help people, and then by going into mass production, mass manufacturing, and mass release of this stuff? I mean, if you had this push months ago, instead of the failure we've seen in our medical and political establishment, I think a lot more lives would have been saved. And frankly, that would have meant we would have been able to get out of the economic crisis that's concomitant with that medical crisis. That's my take there, Jamarl. What's yours?
I don't think the failure was in the medical establishment. I think the failure was in the political establishment. I think there's a difference. I think that, I think it flows from the top, personally. If a competent president, not even a great one, just competent, comes in and says, all right, what are we supposed to do with this? We need masks. Give them the masks. We need companies to make this. Okay, get companies to make this. And in February, when the president of the United States, privy to all sorts of information, and knew that this was going to be bad, knew it was going to be deadlier than the flu, if that president, instead of looking at it from the standpoint of how does this make me look, or how do I get the economy up and running, took competent leadership in ensuring that the supplies and everything was there, the medical community would have hopped in. Don't misunderstand me. I think something like a Medicare for all and that type of stuff in order to incentivize people to get help or whatever. Yeah, but people were going to go anyway at that point when they realized it was something severe. No, I think it comes from the top. I'm not going to put this on the medical establishment at all. And I know you want to blame Fauci, but I'm not blaming this on Fauci at all.
I mean, I blame Fauci because we talk about Fauci, but Fauci is just a career doctor or whatever. He's a career administrator of this stuff. He's just the visible face of this stuff. Fauci, in some sense, doesn't matter. There is a deep rot, yes, in our political establishment, that in all of the institutions arrayed around it, including our medical establishment, including the educational establishment. These are the spheres of power in our society who, of their own accord and largely in response to the decay of our political establishment, have failed to perform their essential functions. That's how I see it fundamentally. So yes, it's political, but it's not like it's all Trump's fault or all Fauci's fault or all Pelosi's or Biden's or Obama's fault. This is a long process. And again, a lot of the problems we're seeing now are the later symptoms of that crisis. That's how I see it.
I guess I'm making the point that it's not the medical establishment's fault, that the political establishment didn't ensure that the supplies were there for them to do their jobs. It's a difference. If I say, all right, Shane, I'm going to hire you as a radio host, you say, great, and I don't provide you with a radio station, you can't say it's your fault also that the show didn't go well. That's kind of the point that I'm making. They needed the ability to do what they needed to do, and if the supplies weren't there, if I don't supply the NBA team with a basketball, that's going to be a crappy basketball show. Does it make sense?
Wait, I hear what you're saying.
Like, do you get my point, or do you disagree with that?
I do. I do. No, we could go back and forth. I agree, but there are caveats, and those caveats would turn into a longer discussion.
Fair enough. All right, let's get back to the headlines then. Fair enough. All right. China has officially joined the global vaccine initiative for distributing 2 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccine around the world by the end of the year, according to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua Chunying said on Friday that Beijing had joined the initiative known as COVAX, making China the largest economy to join the coalition, which is aimed at countering so-called vaccine nationalism. Good on China. The United States has said it would not join the alliance, calling it constraining and over-influenced by the World Health Organization and, of course, China. Beijing has initially missed the deadline for joining the COVAX initiative, co-led by the World Health Organization, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. The goal of the alliance, as many as 171 countries, is to provide the COVID-19 vaccine to targeted 3% of each participating country's most at-risk population by sharing the cost of research and distribution among developed and developing countries. Shane, why is that not just standard for all diseases and drugs? That seems like
I think because the
good idea.
world administrative bodies have their own problem.
They
yeah,
do,
I mean, just briefly, we've got, yeah.
I guess I'm saying they do, but even though those things do have their own problems, it does make sense with this notion of, hey, let's ensure that everybody in the world that is at the lowest end of their countries get medical treatment for diseases, whatever those diseases are. I guess I'm saying, why is COVID special?
Because it's a world crisis, and it's, as far as I can tell, it has been, it's a once-in-a-century disease. That is certainly how it's been painted. So it makes sense. I mean, here's the thing, though. I agree with you, but this is going to be a much longer conversation. We should probably just get back into headlines, man.
Okay, fair enough. He shirks away, backs away. Kyrgyzstan's president, Censorship, Bekov, said on Friday that he's ready to resign once a new cabinet is appointed. This comes as he declared a state of emergency in the capital, Bishkek. Opposition groups have quarreled among themselves since seizing government buildings and forcing the cancellation of election results this week, the election this week. The opposition is divided among 11 parties which represented clan interests in a country that has already seen 2 presidents topple by a popular revolt since 2005. Thousands of followers took to the streets at rival rallies that politicians said posed a danger of violence. Russia described the situation in Kyrgyzstan, which borders China and hosts a Russian military base, as a mess and chaos, quote unquote. And a first step towards consolidating a new political establishment, 2 rival candidates for the premiership, Umbek Babanov and Tilek, let's just go with Tilek, said on Friday that they would work together, with the latter coming to a deputy prime minister. They will be backed by 4 parties, a local news website reported. A third candidate, Sidir Zaporov, backed by Ada Zerk party, had yet to comment on their move, and 6 other opposition parties had yet to make the positions clear. Babanov said President Jean Bekov could avoid impeachment, which would leave him vulnerable to subsequent prosecution if he quit after signing off on the new cabinet lineup. President Jean Bekov has said that he would do exactly that, and as of this morning, he's declared a state of emergency in the capital of Kyrgyzstan, Bishkek. President Donald Trump said on Thursday he may return to the campaign trail with a rally on Saturday after the White House physician said that he's completed his course of therapy for the novel coronavirus that could resume public events. Trump said that he's likely to take the test for the coronavirus on Friday after testing positive for it a week ago. The White House has declined to say when the president last tested negative for COVID-19. The White House physician Sean Connolly said earlier on Thursday that President Trump completed his course of therapy for the disease, had remained stable since returning to the White House from the military hospital on Monday, and can resume public engagement on Saturday. In a memo released by the White House, Trump's doctor said that Trump had responded extremely well, quote unquote, to treatment without evidence of adverse effects. Since returning home, his physical exam remained stable and devoid of any indications to suggest progression of illness. Saturday will be the day 10 since Donald Trump's or since Thursday diagnosis, and based on the trajectory of the advanced diagnostics team that's been conducted, I fully anticipate Donald Trump's safe return to the public engagement at that time. Shane, I'll give you this. If there was an independent doctor that tested Donald Trump, meaning if the other campaigns, Joe Biden picked a doctor, and that doctor tested him, and he tested twice negative, no issue with the debate. That's the catch. That's the way to square that circle. Because you're right, it's a litany of ideas and everything else. And you need to find some way to make sure that Joe Biden is safe in that. And I think that might be the way to do it. You just need independent analysis of whether or not the president is infected. And if he's not, have the debate. That's the way I'm looking at it. So let's go to this one. With the sustained winds of 120 miles per hour, Hurricane Delta is expected to weaken as it nears the Gulf Coast and weaken rapidly as it comes ashore. Many residents of Barrier Islands have moved inland ahead of the arrival of the hurricane. Those are your headlines. You are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And let's do this. We're at the break, so let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, definitely give up the like and share this content, whatever content you're either viewing or listening to us on. You can also get involved in a conversation with a chat, a tweet, and of course, by phone, 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy to call in. But now, with us, one of my favorite guests. I call him the most terrifying man on the planet, even though he's been one of the nicest guests that I've ever had on the show. I want to bring on Guy McPherson, Dr. Guy McPherson, author, award-winning scientist, emeritus professor at the University of Arizona. Guy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jamarl. Thank you, Shane. It's a pleasure to be back with you.
Absolutely. So, 2 stories. 2 stories. And it's amazing that these stories appear within, a short period of each other. Bloomberg comes out with a story that basically says ExxonMobil is determining Exxon's plan for surging carbon emissions revealed in a leaked documents. Basically, an oil company plans to try to get more oil. Yeah, just not mind-blowing. But I think they put it out, or I think maybe the interesting part, really, is that Bloomberg is running this story, which means that on some level, people have started to pay attention to the fact that their world around them is changing. So, okay, aces on that point. Good. But then you have the other story that kind of makes that point that much more acute, that shows weather is getting worse. And, you could see it was these tests that came out that made it that much more clear. I mean, we get more and more experimental evidence every day that shows that our world is getting that much more wetter and that much more violent in regards to weather. Am I wrong in that?
No, you're exactly dead on. And ExxonMobil has known for a long time where we were headed. In fact, in 1982, their lead scientist, Andrew Caligari, predicted that we were headed for 410 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in 2010. He nailed it nearly 30 years in advance. And what did ExxonMobil do? They did what all public companies do. They maximize profits for their shareholders.
Well, that's their jobs. I mean, I think that's what people, there's a big fight going on right now in, I think, the environmentalist movement. And I think it was started by Michael Moore. And I don't mean started in a poor way, but put out a video, Planet of the Humans. And I've seen Josh Fox and I've seen Michael Moore give their commentary. And I think what they're trying to really get at is this notion of why did these other, at least the way Michael Moore described it, why did other, let's say, movements succeed, but this one not? And I think the answer gets in line with this, right? Profits. I mean, at the end of the day, in order for a civil rights movement to succeed, that's not entirely hitting profits. I mean, whereas the environmental movement directly hits at this notion of these guys' ability to make billions of dollars. And in as such, I think they have difficulty moving the needle. Am I wrong on that, or is there something else that I'm just fundamentally missing? Am I thinking of this too much in terms of class?
No, I couldn't agree more. You know, in the 1960s, early 70s, in the midst of the American Cultural Revolution, there was this movement to get us out of war, specifically Vietnam, to promote social justice and to clean up the environment. And significant progress was made on all of those fronts. But when we're talking about profit, when we're talking about a U.S. law that requires public companies to adhere to the duties of loyalty and care, and especially when care is most often interpreted as maximizing profit, then we're headed right where we're at. You know, so you can pay attention to the environment at some level. You can pay attention to social justice at some level. But when it comes to the point that Jeff Bezos' company, Amazon, for example, has to pay too close of attention to social justice, well, they're not going to do that if profit gets in the way. So that's why Amazon has had 20,000 cases of COVID-19 show up. And, you know, those public organizations supported by shareholders and committed to shareholder profits can only go so far before those shareholders rise up and say, wait a minute, I'm not making enough money on this deal. So we got to do something different here. And so, you know, the rubber is now meeting the road when it comes to environmental protection. And Planet of the Humans is a great example of somebody pointing that out, finally. Kevin, along with my co-host Kevin Hester, we interviewed Jeff Gibbs, who directed and basically created that film for Nature Bats Last Radio on July 10th of this year. And there's little question that Jeff Gibbs has been treated very badly. Michael Moore is making a significant stand on his behalf because he was the producer of the film. And so they're trying to push back, but at the same time, we have so-called environmentalists, Al Gore and Bill McKibben and others, who are collaborating with the biofuels movement, which means cutting down every tree they can find, collaborating with the timber companies, and trying to convince us that cutting down every tree on the planet is a good idea and that somehow that saves the environment. So we're at the critical point that we've been warned about for decades, at least since I was a small child. I remember hearing my parents talk about it, the nexus between environmental protection and the economy. And it's tough to see a way through this, that everybody gets a lot of money and we also continue to preserve some elements of the living planet.
Guy, thank you for being with us. This is Shane here. I agree with you. Fundamentally, I agree that there's problems on both ends. Corporations don't want to sacrifice their profits. And frankly, governments usually get bought out by corporations. They also have their own interests, of course. But neither seems to be doing much good for the earth. But I'm going to bring in a slight devil's advocate position here. This might be this sort of state-of-the-art defense of capitalism from an environmentalist perspective. What's your take on somebody like Elon Musk? I mean, Elon, just very briefly, before I hand it back over to you, Elon Musk, as far as I can tell, is not the kind of person who could have come to the fore developing technologies that in the near to long run may do much good for the earth yet, potentially. I'd like to hear your take on that. The government seems to be busy, at this point at least, bureaucratizing human potential. Somebody like Elon Musk, somebody at the very least in an abstract sense, with an independent conviction to try to make the world a better place. Again, you could dispute that characterization, but just to hold it in the conversation for a second, somebody like he could not have come to the fore, couldn't have come to any level of success in the government, as far as I can tell, simply because it's bought out already. So what's your take broadly on him, but also on the sort of wider argument that I'm making there, Guy?
I was making the case for this exact issue. I was talking about the trade-off between the environment and the economy on a recent trip, and I was talking to a 20-something who I'd never met before. And he said, I have great faith in Elon Musk. He is a humanitarian who will not let our species go extinct. And I was thinking, but I didn't say, that I think Elon Musk is firmly committed to not letting him and his family go extinct for as long as possible. But I don't see much indication that Elon Musk and others of his ilk are interested in giving up a significant amount of their privilege in defense of environmental protection. We could argue about that particular point all day, but I'm working on a project with scientists from Harvard, and I keep hearing that all we need is $1 billion, maybe even $100 million to get this thing rolling and off the ground, and it is designed to preserve habitat for human animals on the planet. And occasionally I hear about somebody who says, I have a direct connection to Jeff Bezos, I'm going to contact him right away. Yet I never, ever see this project, the MEERS project, described in the corporate media, and I never see that money coming forward to support the MEERS project. It's not a large amount of money from the perspective of somebody like Jeff Bezos, and yet I don't see that connection being made. We're talking about the preservation of all life on Earth here, including human life, and I just don't see people stepping forward who have the means to make that happen, to even ask the questions. So I think there's a couple of missing pieces here, and it's frustrating for me. I don't see a path forward, and the limited potential route I do see forward that might save habitat for humans, I don't see that gaining a lot of traction, and that's quite disappointing.
I think the truth of it is, Guy, is that it's kind of like hope and change. I'm sorry, Guy. I apologize. I thought there was a gap. I didn't necessarily realize you weren't finished. Please finish.
There was a gap. I'm sorry about that. And what I really want is to have just Jeff Bezos or Warren Buffett or Bill Gates or somebody of that billionaire class give me a call, and I'll explain to them that they can actually save habitat for humans here on planet Earth with a relatively small investment compared to the kinds of money that they've been throwing around for decades. So I know that's probably a ridiculous request, but I'm making it anyway, right here in one of the few outlets I have.
I don't think that's a ridiculous request at all. I think your point is that I think some people can get enraptured in billionaire savers. The capitalists will save us. In the same way people get enraptured with Obama and hope and change. I think these guys love the environment the way Obama loves hope and change. It's a bumper sticker. In real terms, if they could save the world and make $20 billion, they would do it in a heartbeat. If there's not a pathway of doing that, they're not going to do that. I think, so it's don't misunderstand me. I do think they may have certain environmental ideals, like I want this techno future, I want this place, I want the Earth to be a better place, etc. But like you said, the catch becomes, where does the rubber meet the road? And if it comes down to, oh wait, I can't have both, and the reality of it is, I don't think it's going to be the environment that gets denied. What do you think, Guy?
Yeah, I'm afraid you're absolutely right. And Tim Garrett is a professor of atmospheric science at the University of Utah, and he has written at least 4 peer-reviewed papers indicating that civilization itself is a heat engine, that if we maintain this set of living arrangements, then we are committed to overheating the planet, to continue overheating the planet. And I don't hear anybody talking about that. That was missing from Planet of the Humans, as was the aerosol masking effect. Of course, we've talked about the aerosol masking effect on this show before, and it seems to be missing from every conversation that is committed to slowing abrupt climate change. And so those are a couple of disappointing missing pieces. And I'm absolutely certain that the people who we might say are the elite or who are pulling the strings of empire or are in the billionaire class, I'm absolutely convinced that they know about the aerosol masking effect. that they know that we have triggered self-reinforcing feedback loops, and that what it comes down to is money is more important than saving habitat for humans for a certain group of people.
Guy, we've got to go out now, but I want to thank you for joining us. I'd also like to extend an invitation if you'd be willing to join us sometime in the future. I'd love to hear your $100 billion proposal. And I'd also like to have a conversation with you about a variety of other alternative attempts to restore ecosystems around the world. I was looking at the American Prairie Reserve a few weeks ago. The attempt to create the largest contiguous reserve in the continental United States. But Guy, thank you again for being with us.
Thank you for that invitation. I look forward to our next conversation, Shane and Jamarl.
Absolutely. For those listening, that was Dr. Guy McPherson, an internationally recognized speaker, award-winning scientist, and the world's leading authority on abrupt climate change leading to near-term human extinction. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. We will be back in 1 minute.
Fault Lines. Catch all the breaking global, political, and economic news as it happens. Sputnik brings an all-star lineup with expert opinion from some of the biggest names in the news today. Noam Chomsky.
Turkey, U.S. ally, their main goal is to attack the Kurds, the one ground force opposing ISIS. And there have been a kind of a funnel for support of ISIS, not officially, but in practice.
Peter Sunde, co-founder of the Pirate Bay.
We don't have any sort of democratic control over the internet. And I think that we're very naive when we think that the internet itself is intrinsically good. It's not. It's just a very neutral technology that is being used for good things, but more and more being used for evil things.
Icelandic Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson.
We increase activities in the Keflavik airbase, and that has to do with more activities from the Russian Northern Fleet in the ocean around Iceland, and also, of course, these usual flights of the bombers.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
We're the ones that destroyed the government of Libya. We're the ones that putting in a pipeline dispute that helped destroy the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We're the ones who invaded Iraq.
Former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry.
The hostile relationship between the United States and Russia today is dangerous for both countries, not because either country would actually want to start a military conflict, but because there's always a danger of blundering.
Sputnik talks to the brightest minds in politics and current affairs to find out what's really happening. Tune in. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. And our guest for this segment and the next, Margaret Kimberly. She's a senior columnist and editor for Black Agenda Report and the author of Presidential, Black America, and the Presidents. Margaret, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. Good to be back.
Hey, great to have you. All right, let's start it here. You posted an article over to Black Agenda Report just a couple of days ago at this point about liberal sympathy for Trump. This follows Trump's contraction of COVID-19, his hospitalization, and then a wave of support coming from the quote-unquote left. Can you make your case here, Margaret? What did you see?
I thought it was odd. At first, we're never told anything positive about Trump, and that is as it should be. He's a liar. He's a fascist. He's Hitler. If he's not Hitler, he's a cut-rate Mussolini. He's bringing white supremacy back to the country. He's ginning up the Proud Boys and militias to rise up and shoot the rest of us. That's what you hear, and he's a liar. Nothing good about him. Jokes about him. He's Putin's puppet, on and on and on. And suddenly we learn that he has contracted COVID-19, and people felt, there were many people who felt compelled to say, I wished him well. Excuse me, in the same breath as they called him a white supremacist. Well, if you think he's a white supremacist, why are you wishing him well? What's up with that? I think underneath, when I thought about it, underneath the contempt, underneath the condemnation, these are people who love the establishment. And you really see it when anybody in their class is in some sort of trouble, then you see them stick their fingers in the air, see which way the wind is blowing. So then they want to have it both ways and say, well, yeah, I think he's a fascist, but I'm sorry, he's sick. I feel bad. Now, I don't feel bad for anybody I really believe is a fascist, so I didn't quite understand this. So I wrote about Rachel Maddow and Ava DuVernay in particular. Rachel Maddow was really over the top. God bless the president and the first lady. I mean, seriously. And Ava DuVernay, who's, after the debate, she wrote how he's a white supremacist. I can't stand what he said about the Proud Boys, but still, I wish him well. So these are people who are influential, who are wealthy, and they don't really want their interests to be disturbed at all. And I think that is what came out in the wake of the announcement about Trump.
It is weird. Now, when I did my video the very next day, I said, I hope it hurts. Now, the reason I said I hope it hurts is because there are 200,000 dead people in this country and 7 million people that are infected, that many of which don't have health care because a disproportionate number of those people were either black or Hispanic. And I find him responsible. I find him massively culpable for a lot of these injuries and deaths. And so my response was, I hope it hurts. I hope it lasts for a very long time. And I hope when he comes out of it, he's like, wow. And he's like John McCain after being tortured, where John McCain is like, I hate torture. And he comes out, he says, we need to max, all forces at our disposal. I had no expectation of that, but I did want it to hurt. I guess that's my point, right? If you say the guy's a racist, the guy's a fascist, the guy has all these kids in cages, the guy does all of these horrible, horrible things where you're comparing them to like Hitler. And then you say, I wish him well, though. You're right. It's a bizarre thing. Yeah. Do you think it's social pressure, or do you think it's where they're thinking to themselves, okay, this is going out to a lot of people, and I don't want these people to feel this way or think I'm the type of person that does. Meaning, do you think it's theatrical putting on airs, or do you think this is what they really think? I'm always curious about this. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of those things, depending on the individual. Someone pointed out to me, some of them may have thought he was going to die, and they didn't want to be seen as someone speaking ill of the dead if he did pass away. I never thought that. I knew he would get the best care. We've been going through this for many months. I think doctors now have a better handle on treating the disease. So I never felt like he was in danger. I never did. Although, of course, that remains to be seen. Who knows with Trump? But I think it was a combination of that, not wanting to be viewed as, dancing on someone's grave or dancing on their hospital bed. And but I also say that you didn't have to say anything. You could have just been quiet if you weren't sure what to say. Silence in that case, silence would have been golden. But I also think there's those other things I mentioned are at play. Someone like Rachel Maddow is just a propagandist. People love her. Liberals love her, and they think she's really of the same mind they are, and she is not. She's a propagandist for one wing of the duopoly, in this case for the Democratic Party. This is a woman who, despite her liberal credentials, supposedly, called Roger Ailes, the late Roger Ailes, her friend and mentor, the man who gave us Fox News, which liberals see as their enemy. So she's just a smooth operator, and that's all right if that's what you want to be. But no one else should be fooled about who or what you are. In case you can't tell, I've never been a fan of hers. As for Ava DuVernay, as a black person, she's one of the gatekeepers. She plays the role of gatekeeping for the black political class, for the misleadership class, as we call them at Black Agenda Report.
Ms. Kimberly, wait a minute. Let me interrupt for 1 second. And I hate to do this. Rachel Maddow for a second. When I deal with media, I'm always intrigued by the question of, are they lying or do they really believe it? And with Rachel Maddow, there's an extra thing from the standpoint of liberals. Are they actually terrified? Meaning, is it one of those things where people like CNN, and MSNBC was always there, but let's say CNN, for example, people like Chuck Todds of the world or the Jake Tappers of the world, where these guys look at Trump and they're like, oh my God, he's something different. He's terrifying to me. And he's so terrifying to me, any notion of me doing honest to God news and reporting is out the window. And I need to get on some sort of mission to stop this guy, to save America. Are they there? And is that the explanation of this kind of Rhodes Scholar just kind of throwing that away in order to just do propaganda with the whole Russiagate nonsense? Or what you're seeing on CNN and the mainstream media, where they just continuously get it wrong in one direction? And leaks, yeah, but the leaks are always in one direction. Like, is that it? Or is it something else? Like, I don't know how to frame what I've seen in the last 3 years from the standpoint of media. And I have various ideas on it, but what's yours?
Well, these people, they make a lot of money. They do ultimately what their bosses want them to do, like everybody else who gets a paycheck. Of course, they get gigantic paychecks. I think Rachel Maddow makes $8 million a year. Ava DuVernay has an estimated net worth of $50 million. These people make a good living. They've become rich by following the rules of one wing of the ruling class. Their wing is the Democratic Party wing, and that's where their allegiance lies. Excuse me, not with us, not with telling us, in giving us information. It's with propping up their part of the rulers. So Trump is not one of their people. So first of all, he's a Republican. They're Democrats, so he's anathema for that reason. Although I think if he had better manners, they probably would treat him nicer. I think a lot of the issue with Trump is, frankly, with his demeanor. I think a lot of these folks would go along with a lot of what he does if he just was nicer to them. So I think that's what happens to them. I don't think we should give them too much credit. Trump was not supposed to win. He's not their guy. He's not from their wing of the duopoly, so they don't like him anyway. And he does all these things that trigger people, and that makes it even easier. But when the rubber meets the road, when it's announced that he was sick, then the truth about them comes out. They are people describe them as scribes. And so they don't give us, just look at what they do ordinarily. Do they really tell us what we need to know? Do they really report the news? Do they give us analysis that's useful to us? No, they do not. And we saw that when there was a moment of disruption and they weren't sure where to side or how to show their side.
So you're right. The point of the article, in some sense, at least how I'm reading one side of it, is the irony here. Now, ironies aren't just trivial. Often, they're not just superficial. They reveal some deeper underlying contradiction here. And like you've been saying, if they've been calling him a white supremacist, if they've been, bagging on him constantly for years in different ways, in the strongest of terms, it's ironic to see them suddenly standing up to defend him when he's sick. I completely agree with that. But instead of, I hear your argument on class consciousness. All I see them doing, in some sense, is trying to save face. If the irony there, of course, is why would they save face trying to defend somebody who they've constantly criticized over recent years, again, in the utmost of terms, the utmost of negative terms. What that brings to mind for me, though, is just how off base those original criticisms were. If you're going to level a lot of those criticisms against Trump, you could also level them against Obama, or against the second Bush, or against Clinton, or against the first Bush. And for me, it's not so much, I see the class consciousness argument that you're making. For me, it's not so much that. For me, it's simply a result of the declining, increasingly polarized, increasingly insane political system that we're living in, where at first, for years, like we've been talking about, they've been criticizing him constantly. And now all of a sudden the gloves get put back on and they start defending him. Margaret, what's your take on that?
Well, yeah, these are people who, if Trump tried to curry favor with them, would have a lot fewer problems. You see what happens whenever there's any sort of military action. There were missile strikes on Syria, and I can't think of his name from NBC. Spoke of the beautiful weapons, like they were fireworks or something. No, these are going to kill people. And they start defending him. And they start saying he behaves in a presidential way. So you see it when there's any disruption to in his behavior. But you're absolutely right. There were, kids in cages at the border under Obama. The Obama administration argued in favor of deporting people. That he was the deporter in chief. In fact, many more deportations actually than under Trump. The destruction of Libya, the killings of thousands of people, bailing out of the banks, all these things that liberals are supposed to oppose, they didn't oppose.
No, they just sat by for the most part. Margaret, we've got to go into a break. And here's the crucial thing. I named like 5 presidents there, and it was literally because we don't have that much time. I'm not going to enumerate every one, but you stopped at Obama just because we were running out of time. We could have gone on and on and on. The cycle seems to be getting worse. In any event, we're joined by Margaret Kimberly, senior columnist and editor for the Black Agenda Report, also the author of Presidential, Black America, and the Presidents. We will be back with her in just a minute on the other side of this break.
Fault lines.
This is Radio Sputnik.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
You check top.
We couldn't put it better ourselves. Tune in to Political Misfits on Mondays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Miss the Press, our weekly takedown of Sunday's toothless news talk shows.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan and our guest, Margaret Kimberly. She's a senior columnist and the editor of the Black Agenda Report and author of Presidential, Black America, and the Presidents. I actually want to turn to that, Margaret. I want to turn to your book, a book Cornel West described as a, quote, prophetic fire, an intellectual gem of prophetic fire about all the U.S. presidents and their deep roots in the vicious legacy of white supremacy and predatory capitalism. Quote, end quote. From your preface to the book, you say that it's an effort to shed light on the truth to the extent that our leaders, I'm quoting here, to the extent that our leaders embody aspects of who we are as a people, studying how each president has participated in our nation's complicated and often shameful treatment of Black people is as good a place as any to start, end quote. Margaret, I'm going to let you take it away. I'm curious. This is a book you released earlier this year, back in February of this year. That was an advance, and it, not necessarily an anticipation, but I'll let you resolve that. Of this year's protests, of the Black Lives Matter protests, arguably themselves a response, of course, to the negligence of American presidents and the American political system. Can you make your case? What was your arguments in this book, Margaret, and what did your research show you?
Well, my research in this book showed me that, first of all, this country is, the foundations of this country as a settler colonial state, committing genocide against indigenous people, the chattel slavery system, which lasted for a couple hundred years. That means we have a foundation that is inherently racist. And that is obviously going to be expressed in our politics. So from the beginning, the early presidents were almost all slaveholders. 10 of the first 12 presidents were slaveholders. And after the Civil War, we saw Jim Crow. We saw presidents who, if they ever did the right thing, it was mostly because they were pushed into it. We saw FDR and JFK, who at that time still relied on support from Southern Democrats and who constantly made excuses when they were asked to pass anti-lynching legislation or support the civil rights movement more strongly. Then we see a rightward shift in the days of Ronald Reagan and afterwards, which impacted the Democratic Party too. So in this system that's inherently racist, Black people are constantly fighting to be heard, fighting to maintain our human rights, never being able to stop, even after laws make discrimination illegal and people in the South got the right to vote. What do we see after that? We see a constant erosion of those rights that were won with so much determination. And that is where we always are. The struggle, what do we say? The struggle continues. It's constant. And even with the Black president, there was so much happiness about having a Black president. But he became president precisely because he did not touch that systemic racism. He did not respond to any appeal to Black people for redress of our very specific grievances. In fact, he would scold Black people. In fact, he still does, as does his wife. So that's what I found out. There are lots of details of, I'm very pleased that I did so much research that it's, I can defend what I have said. So I think anybody interested in presidential history, in American history, should read the book.
Margaret, I don't understand. Of the people who vote Democrat, roughly 90% are Black, or 90% of Blacks, their support goes to Democratic Party. Doesn't that mean that, we're going to vote in King of Blacks, Joe Biden, that we've overcome, that we've taken over, that this is a Black supremacy in this country, seeing that one of the major parties has been absorbed by African Americans. Of course, this is tongue in cheek. I'm being sarcastic, but only to a certain degree. African Americans vote to the tune of like 90% Democrat. How do you get a vote of this many people into this much of a group without any power in that process? Meaning, how do you have that many people backing a political party? By the way, they can't win without that support at this point. And yet,
that's true.
End up with no power, zero power. I've heard people out there saying voting is power. No, not if you're voting for Joe Biden. And I keep making this point that a vote for Joe Biden is, believe it or not, a subversion of democracy, not democracy, because you're voting for him for cowardice. Explain that. How do you get this many people voting for this group and yet have no power in the process to which they are giving this much support?
Well, it's just to keep it simple, this history, the system that I've described means that there's going to be a white political party and a Black political party. And for many decades, the Republicans, the party of Lincoln, was the party that got Black votes. Things switched. And now it's been the Democrats for the last 50 years consistently. Basically, people are just trying to keep the white party at bay. And that's all our vote amounts to now. And it's a longer story, but Black politics now, such as it is, amounts to nothing more than keeping Republicans out of office. People can't really defend Biden. There are a few who try, but most of them will just say, we have to keep the Republicans out because, excuse me, they are the white party now. And the Democrats depend on Black votes, but as I often say, they wish they didn't. And so instead of appealing to the needs of this group, they constantly hope to get the votes of other people. So Biden is constantly making appeals to Republicans. They're always bragging that this or that Republican has endorsed Biden. And that's because they don't want our support. They don't want to be seen with us in the morning, so to speak. And that is how we end up being political losers, because we if we behave as though the electoral system is the determining factor in what happens to us, we will always be losers. And I want to get back to something I said earlier, this black political class. So someone like Ava DuVernay, after Kamala Harris was chosen as Biden's running mate, she wrote this stupid little missive in social media saying anybody who questioned Kamala Harris from this moment on was disrespecting our ancestors. Now, that's just gatekeeping. So whenever there's an inkling, just a tiny bit of an inkling that black people may ask a question or may step out of line, right away we see someone from that group telling us, no, you're not allowed to do that. And unfortunately, this system, and of course, when the Republicans offer up somebody like Trump, who's very overt in his racism, that only accentuates this dynamic that I've described.
And that quote that you just gave, I mean, that's a pretty good example of what's usually called identity politics, which, as far as I can tell, through the political divide, through the black-white party distinction that you were making, seems just to be an example of modern political segregation. As far as I can tell, if there's going to be a resolution to that problem in America, it can only feasibly come by some real, genuine, long-lasting, and successful attempt to, make up for a lot of the historical inequities that are foundational to the American state. I mean, I'm somebody who likes America, somebody who loves America, but it comes despite, obviously, our foundation, as you were saying, as a colonial settler state that not only killed the natives of this country, of this continent, but of course was also founded in large part on, the economic system of slavery. So there's a lot to recover there, but here's where I'm going with it. It seems like if we're going to get past that, the only possible way that can come in some long-lasting sense, the only way that different minority groups, including and particularly Black Americans, can the only way that's going to come is if they get representation equally on both parties. And I think the only way that's going to happen is if we solve those underlying problems. Now, the question of how we do that, in my opinion, is complicated. But frankly, it was exciting to see that come up for a second during the primaries with Marianne Williamson particularly talking about reparations. Broadly, though, Margaret, what's your take on that whole set of issues?
Well, I think, just to keep it simple, Black politics must always practice self-determination. We have to be independent. We have to determine for ourselves what is best for us. And we cannot be fooled by Black politicians who don't represent our interests, or white politicians like, Joe Biden, who's, especially stupid. If you don't vote for me, you ain't Black. That any of these people can be offered up to us, and we feel like we don't have a choice. That is the worst thing to me, to say that because Donald Trump is president, we have no other choice except to vote for Biden. That is our only salvation, is to put Biden in office. We are going to have to struggle no matter who the president is. We will have a different struggle, in some ways a more difficult struggle, if there's a Democrat in the White House, because there will be a sigh of relief. We'll see nice Black people we like, not Ben Carson or Candace Owens or Kanye West. Black people we can all agree on, who will get big jobs and will be spokespeople, and there will be a feeling of comfort, but without any change, and with those people being in power, still doing what the system demands of them, which means things that are against our interests. So there's struggle coming regardless of who wins on Election Day.
Margaret, we were out of time here, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you both.
And for those listening, that was the voice of Margaret Kimberly, senior columnist and editor for Black Agenda Report, also the author of Presidential Black America and the Presidents. That was a book we were just talking about with her. You can go check that out, released earlier this year. Again, Presidential Black America and the Presidents. By the way, you can also follow Margaret on Twitter at Freedom Ride Blog. Again, Freedom Ride Blog. And you can find her work at blackagendareport.com. We're closing out our second hour here. We will be back in just a minute with headlines. Quick note here for those listening, we will not be on air on Monday. Monday is a federal holiday. We're not We're not gone forever. We're just taking the day off like many other folks across this country. But we'll be back on the other side of this break. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. See you then.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, it is now time for our last hour of the week. You're listening to the most disruptive show. Penetrating, hopefully unifying. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. In the politically independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall with my co-host, Shane Stranahan, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And without further ado, let's get to the headlines. There's madness in Michigan as 6 men are under arrest there on federal charges that they plotted to kill Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, while 7 others were arrested for plotting to storm Michigan's Capitol building to start a civil war. Governor Whitmer and former Vice President Joe Biden suggested President Trump's rhetoric played a role. 7 of the men either founded or are affiliated with a self-styled militia calling themselves the Wolverine Watchmen. Michigan, by the way, is nicknamed the Wolverine State for its one-time abundance of Wolverines. The 7 men were charged with state crimes which carry penalties of 2 to 20 years in prison. The state's Attorney General, Dana Nessel, accused them of collecting addresses of police officers in order to target them, threatening to start a civil war, quote, leading to societal collapse, end quote, and planning to kidnap the governor and other government officials in that state. Well, Armenia and Azerbaijan have confirmed that their foreign ministers will come to talks in Moscow on Monday. This will mark the first time that they have both shown real willingness to discuss a ceasefire. Azerbaijan confirmed that Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov will take part in talks in Moscow as Azeri and ethnic Armenian forces clashed again over the breakaway region of Nagorno-Karabakh. Fighting in Nagorno-Karabakh has continued for a second week as Armenia and Azerbaijan battle over that region. We are now on day 13 of this most recent round of clashes. So far, the two rivals are ignoring international appeals for a ceasefire. Hopefully that changes. And they have accused one another of causing hundreds of civilian and military casualties since clashing on September 27th. Well, there's a debate date debacle. President Trump's re-election campaign says the Biden campaign should stick to their original debate schedule. The two were supposed to meet next week for the second debate in Miami. However, the commission responsible for the debates said they should switch to a virtual debate due to the president's coronavirus infection. The president said he's not willing to attend a debate virtually. Biden's campaign then said if they weren't going to debate that night, that he'd host a town hall to be moderated by George Stephanopoulos. Trump has continued to call for the debate to be held in person, with his campaign manager citing Trump's doctor as he said that there was, quote, no medical reason why the Commission on Presidential Debates should shift the debate to a virtual setting, postpone it, or otherwise alter it in any way. The date of that upcoming debate is still uncertain. And related news here, President Donald Trump said on Thursday he may return to the campaign trail with a rally on Saturday after the White House physician said he had completed his course of therapy for the novel coronavirus and could resume public events. That would be this Saturday. Trump said he was likely to take a test for the coronavirus today after testing positive for it a week ago. The White House has declined to say when the president last tested negative for COVID-19. And again, his physician said earlier on Thursday that Trump had completed his course of therapy, had remained stable since returning to the White House from a military hospital, and would be available for public engagement starting the first day of this weekend, on Saturday, that is. In a memo released by the White House, Trump's doctor said that Trump had responded, quote, extremely well, end quote, to treatment without any evidence of ongoing adverse effects. I'm going to quote from that memo here. Since returning home, His physical exam has remained stable and devoid of any indications to suggest progression of illness. Saturday will be day 10 since Thursday's diagnosis, and based on the trajectory of advanced diagnostics the team has been conducting, I fully anticipate the president's safe return to public engagements at that time. And, quote, Jamarl, earlier on you said you'd feel most comfortable about this if Trump were walking around in a bubble, or, that was your first claim, that was the hot take there, or if he, repeatedly tested negative for the virus. Do you think he's? This is a segue. Do you think he's going to test negative today, Jamarl? What's your take?
See, that's just it. It's not the testing from his own doctors. If I was Joe Biden's team, I wouldn't trust his doctors either. It's a political contest for president of the universe, and all powers at your disposal will and should be brought to bear to win that contest. Which means that if I'm Joe Biden, I honestly don't want to debate Donald Trump. I don't want to debate him now. I don't want to debate him again. I don't want to debate him at all. And so I want to take, at the very least, every opportunity in the world for him to test positive, which means that I want him testing with my doctor, and that's the only doctor I would be okay with. And we can haggle, we can negotiate, we could come to some kind of independent doctor, but it's going to be somebody else's doctor. That's what I would be if I was Joe Biden's team. And I suspect that's where Joe Biden's team is probably going to get to.
I think what they should do is, like Armenia and Azerbaijan, they should meet in Sochi.
In Moscow. I was going to say in Moscow.
Or in Moscow. And exactly. And they just sort of sit in their own rooms, and the doctors, for one, goes in and tests the other. Biden's campaign can trust Trump for COVID. Trump's campaign can test Biden for dementia. And, then the world will light on fire. But no, I'm just kidding here, of course. Anyway, China has officially joined a global vaccine initiative for distributing 2 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines around the world by the end of next year, according to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua Chunying said on Friday that Beijing had joined the initiative known as COVAX. That would make China the largest economy to join that coalition, which is aimed at countering so-called vaccine nationalism. The U.S. has said that it would not join the alliance, calling it constraining and overly influenced by the World Health Organization and China. Beijing had initially missed the deadline for joining the COVAX initiative, co-led by the World Health Organization, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovations. The goal of the alliance is to get as many as they can of 171 countries to provide COVID-19 vaccines to a targeted 3% of each participating country's most at-risk population by sharing the costs of research and distribution among both developed and developing countries. The president of Kyrgyzstan has said he's willing to step down as new elections are held. This came today. He is ready to resign once a new cabinet is appointed. This also comes as he declared a state of emergency this morning in the capital, Bishkek. As of this morning, by the way, also this is breaking news, the advisor for the former Kyrgyz president, Atambayev, says that that former president was targeted in an assassination attempt. I believe that this follows his release from prison by protesters. So this is all happening in a wave. Opposition groups have been quarreling among themselves since seizing government buildings and forcing the cancellation of election results earlier this week. The opposition, by the way, is divided among 11 parties, which represent planned interests in a country that has already seen 2 presidents toppled by popular revolts since 2005. Thousands of their followers took to the streets at rival rallies that politicians in each party said posed a danger of violence. Russia has described the situation in Kyrgyzstan, which borders China and hosts a Russian military base, as, quote, a mess and chaos, end quote. Going into a little bit more detail here, in a first step towards consolidating a new political establishment, 2 rival candidates for the premiership, those are Omurbek Babanov and Talek Toktogaziev, said on Friday they would work together, with the latter becoming a deputy prime minister. They were backed by 4 parties, a local news website reported. A third candidate, Sadir Zaparov, backed by the Atazert party, had yet to comment on their move, and 6 other opposition parties had yet to make their positions clear. That leaves, as far by my count, 6 out of the 12, it looks like, 11 total parties, 6 out of the 11 total parties not backing any candidates here. That means there's no majority. That means the dust is still going to get kicked up. Babanov said President Zhinbekov could avoid impeachment, which would leave him vulnerable to subsequent prosecution if he quit after signing off on a new cabinet lineup. And again, President Zhinbekov has since said he would do exactly that. And as of this morning, he had also declared a state of emergency in the capital of Kyrgyzstan, Bishkek. There's more global political censorship taking place by the United States and U.S. companies after Facebook moved on Tuesday to ban all accounts linked to the QAnon conspiracy theory. That's a theory that says President Trump is waging a war against elite Satan-worshipping pedophiles. Now Twitter has announced that it has suspended 926 accounts based in Thailand for partaking in coordinated information operations, supposedly on behalf of the Thai military. The announcement comes in the midst of a gathering protest movement within Thailand, which is pushing for the resignation of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, the drafting of a new constitution, and, this is most explosive here, calls for reform of the Thai monarchy. This comes, by the way, as the U.S. Justice Department seized 92 websites it said were used by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to spread information. This was announced on Wednesday. The department said that 4 of the websites were disguised as genuine news outlets based in the U.S., while the others had been, quote, spreading Iranian propaganda online, end quote. I don't know what that means, and I don't like the fact that that the Justice Department did this. It doesn't seem like the kind of thing that we should be doing. I mean, maybe it's the like libertarian in me, whatever term you want to use. But I'm very hesitant about taking down people's websites, even if they're engaging in political speech. Isn't that exactly the kind of speech you want to protect? There's another way to look at this. You know what? Let's come back to it on the other side of headlines. Only one more here. Hurricane Delta is due to make landfall along the Gulf Coast today with top sustained winds of 120 miles per hour. Hurricane Delta is expected to weaken as it nears the Gulf Coast and then weaken rapidly after it comes ashore. Many residents of barrier islands have moved inland ahead of the arrival of the hurricane. And with that, you've listened to our headlines on Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Okay, Jamarl, here's the thing. I don't mean to make too much of this, but this does bug me. And partly it's because we had that conversation with Bradley Blankenship earlier in the week where he was advocating for more censorship, basically, not to mischaracterize him. He's not around to defend himself. But partly
well, he was. I mean, in a flat fact way, he was. Yeah.
What's up?
No, I'm just saying he was.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is, I don't like talking smack about people when they're not around. And I rarely like talking smack about people when they are around. It's just not, whatever. But, this isn't a good thing. Why is it not a good thing? Because it's political speech that you're supposed to protect. As far as I can tell, I mean, political in the sort of rawest, most legal sense of the word. And as long as you're not literally inciting people to violence, it is political speech. It's made political by the fact that people are trying to suppress it. And it seems like in this country that was uniquely founded on principles of free speech, we've become uniquely used to trying to suppress it when it doesn't benefit our national interests. That's ugly in the long run. I can't help but feel like that's just a way for us to mask over all of our problems while we blame other people for theirs. It's the mote in the eye of the other, that kind of thing. Anyway, Jamarl, what's your take?
Those great ideals of free speech work in a situation where people are saying things that are not going against government's interests. That's the answer. It's like, yes, let's have these ideals and so forth. And as long as everyone is on the same page, there's no issue. What happens when your government hits the skids because your government allowed economic instability to creep into all of these other sectors and you didn't deal with many of the issues that availed you, either they were racial or economic or whatever, social issues. You didn't deal with those things. So what happens when people get a little bit more coarse in their speech? What happens when that speech starts turning to the government itself and you have other whispers? I hope you get my point. Like the free speech thing works and the protection of free speech works when people aren't really saying anything or they aren't necessarily saying anything that grates, especially grates against government interests. Those ideals that you're talking about make all sorts of sense from the frame of reference that you're looking at it. From the frame of reference of somebody in power that's paranoid, that wants to keep their power, not so much. And they take action to deal with those things. I mean, Obama, hope and change. Didn't stop him from cracking down on Occupy Wall Street while simultaneously subsuming the information or the statements of the 99%, while giving 95% of the income gains to the top 1%. I'm making the point that you're right, but you're right up to the point of a power issue. And when it comes to, going against the needs of individuals in those circles, when they have the power and leverage to do something about it, they do. That's the answer. That's not a great answer, but it's
Here's
true.
The thing. I think here's where we disagree. I think you're seeing poor leadership that is unethical, that will soon be revealed and is already being revealed as illegitimate because it is acting unethically. But I think that there have been good leaders throughout history. I think that good leadership is possible. And good leadership is not just good leadership in a realpolitik sense. It's leadership in a sustainable way where you make actions that, when reviewed by the public, when reviewed by your courtiers, however you want, your advisors, the various auxiliaries of your political agent, your organism or whatever, when it's seen by them, they don't want to take it down. That is, in some sense, good leadership. And hopefully that's ethical leadership too. I think that's historically the case that we make. But maybe we're just living in a uniquely morally denuded time right now, and so it's easy to forget that good leadership is possible. That's my take. But we've got to go into a break. You know what? We'll be back in a minute with Ted Rall talking about America's decaying leadership. We're talking about Trump's tax returns and more. We will be back with Ted in just a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now, the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan, and our guest for this segment and the next, Ted Rall. He's a political cartoonist and syndicated columnist, and thankfully he's with us now. Ted, how are you doing this morning?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. All right. We're going to be talking about a couple of things that you've been talking about recently over at your website, which, by the way, people should check out. That website is rall.com, RALL.com. And by the way, while you're on the interwebs, following my navigation recommendations here, you should go over to twitter.com/Ted Rall, where he's on, and you should subscribe to him and, maybe like some tweets of his. But anyway, I'm gonna stop fluffing you up. Ted, thank you for being with us. Here's what we're talking about: Trump's tax returns. You have an article out this morning titled, "So Trump Really Is a Great Businessman." Can you tell us, what's your take? What'd you see? What are you commenting on here, Ted?
Well, the big revelation, the big reveal from the New York Times piece about Trump's tax returns, aside from the fact that he hardly paid any taxes, $750 2 years in a row and zero for completely in federal taxes for about 15 years. And I know he did pay other forms of taxes, but not federal income taxes. Was that basically Donald Trump, at least on paper, is not a very successful business person because he declares these massive losses. And I was just merely sort of making the point that actually he is obviously, as a scoundrel and a bit of a tax, I won't say cheat because there's no evidence of that, but a tax avoider. He is, he's very much in part and parcel of a tradition that includes giant corporations like Apple Computer and Amazon, and many other CEOs and particularly real estate developers who have arguably the most tax loopholes that they can possibly take advantage of. So for us to focus on Donald Trump's accountants and their ability to avoid him paying taxes, is to sort of miss the point. The point is that the system is inherently corrupt. The problem is that corruption is legal. The problem is not that Donald Trump may be avoiding the law. And in fact, again, I'm going to reiterate, there's no evidence that that's the case. The evidence is that he is probably following the letter of the tax code. As far as we know, that could change. And yet he doesn't have to pay any taxes, while obviously you and me and everyone listening to this does.
Ted, I agree with you on this. When I saw how much he lost, and I thought to myself, that looks bad, but unfortunately, that may be normal. Like, that may be a situation that is far more normal than what people realize. And like you said, the story is not necessarily, oh my God, Donald Trump did this. The story may be, oh my God, a lot of people, or at the very least, let's say a small segment of people, but a lot within the context of a small segment, is getting away with this. This is a normal thing for this much tax avoidance. And so I guess the question becomes, what does the public do about this? Now, the public, for the longest time, has already wanted more taxes on the rich. That's something they've already agreed upon. But it's always weird to me. The media never makes those connections. Do you think that's intentional, or do you think that's just the blind spot? Like, media is mostly done by people who are wealthy. Is this a blind spot of the wealth, that they don't make that connection of, hey, maybe this is something that is not necessarily part and parcel to Trump, but part and parcel to a lot of people of that class, as opposed to this is only related to Trump. We're only going to talk about Trump. Is that a blind spot of the individual, or is that a blind spot regarding a class?
I think it is a blind spot of a class of journalists, and of obviously there's a subtle awareness of corporate ownership that makes journalists very unlikely to promote any kind of progressive or left-leaning thoughts on taxes or any other issue. I mean, if you express yourself as, say, a left libertarian or a socialist, you're not going to get very far in the newsroom of organizations like the New York Times or the Washington Post. But the individual journalists, and I think I'm really glad you brought this up, it's something that most Americans are not aware of. 50 years ago, 100 years ago, newsrooms were very white male, but they were also very working class. It was a very standard way for a journalist to come up would be to be a high school dropout even, and start out as a stringer and then work his way up into doing articles. These guys didn't wear, they didn't wear fancy suits. They were very working class. They didn't know or golf with local business people. They weren't of that class. And so their coverage always reflected that even after they achieved some kind of success as writers, as reporters. Nowadays, to get hired by a newspaper like the New York Times or the Washington Post, you need to go to to Columbia Journalism School or something equivalent. These journalism schools basically give no financial aid at all. So there's no meritocracy. It's very difficult for working class people or people of color to get in the first place. And if they do get in, it's very hard for them to pay the tuition. And so you get very, very few of those people who are able to penetrate that landscape of upper middle class and wealth. And they all think alike. And the ones who do get in are, they're an exception, and they learn that it's better for them to keep their thoughts to themselves.
Ted, I'm glad you brought that up. It's an interesting argument. The credentialization of journalism is another way to put it. As far as I'm considered, as far as I can tell, that's a plague. I'm going to put it in the terms that harsh. It's a plague that has struck many of our institutions. I mean, obviously, a bunch of different sides of that. You want an educated populace, but what this comes with is not just economic baggage in the form of debt. It's also a sort of casual, tacit, implicit, and all-pervading inculcation of certain values and certain perspectives that all to a fault are in support of the establishment's interest in a sort of generic establishment sense. I'm curious, where do we go from there? It seems like the education system maybe this has fallen off the plate of conversations in 2020 with all the other crises going on. But the education system, the higher education system specifically, at least most relevantly to this conversation, has come under a lot of criticism, scrutiny. It's gotten a lot of flack for that exact problem, for the economic baggage it's laid on the people who go through it. Is that going to break it apart? What do you see as the real answer there? I'm kind of giving my own take, and it's admittedly a little bit more apocalyptic than I think you were going. But where do you see that problem, and where do you think that problem can be solved if you admit it's a problem at all, Ted?
Oh, it's a massive problem. I mean, we're in a state now where if you want, I have a high school. My son is a high school junior, so we're looking at that college route right now. And we're in a situation now where if he wants to qualify for even just an entry-level kind of crap data entry job and working at a boring desk job, he's going to have to shell out $65,000, $75,000 a year for 4 years in a row in order just to get through the door and get that interview. And so, obviously that's a problem that everyone in the United States has, and their families who are trying to navigate this. And I think the only solutions are either active. There's a political demand for this system to be changed, or it might just sort of collapse on itself. Because one of the things I hear from even relatively privileged parents is, this is a ripoff. I'm not paying for this. I don't see why I should pay for this. And of course, with widespread unemployment and underemployment, the old deal, the old offer that you could go into debt into student loan debt, and it would all be worthwhile because once you graduated, you'd be able to pay it off with a job that was better than you could otherwise get. That deal is no more. Very clearly, it's been collapsing for years, and with the coronavirus economic downturn, it could just be that this is maybe the beginning of the end for ridiculous colleges who are, they're still charging full tuition at places like Harvard for basically online instruction that's the equivalent of the University of Phoenix.
It seems that like you said, solutions to this, I got to be honest, I'm not entirely sure. There's an incentive for any society. I would go so far as to say any and every society to give a certain degree of propaganda to the population to keep that population in line with certain political ideas that maintains the integrity of the state. Now, that could be more true or false, so don't misunderstand me, but it seems to be something that's inherent to just the way a state functions. Am I wrong on that? I guess I'm trying to go deeper than just how we operate. And maybe the problem here is that in a state that seems to be collapsing, well, it gets distorted. If a state is trying to maintain the integrity of itself and it has some kind of, let's say, association with media in regards to the relationships that these guys have, and the news that they put out becomes more theatrical as opposed to be something that's to the benefit of the public in regards to what the public needs to exist. Am I missing something on that? Maybe what we're looking at is basically the distinction between what a rational government would do versus what an irrational government would do. And in the way that the media relates that information to the public, it looks weird. When we're looking at it and we're seeing it, we're like, that doesn't entirely make sense. Margaret Kimberly made the point of saying, Rachel Maddow and these guys saying, hey, we understand Trump's a fascist. Trump's putting kids in cages. Trump is, kicking puppies. However, if he gets COVID, you better go out there and not say a bad word about him, and we wish him well. This is there's a discontinuity between that. Wait a minute. Is he Hitler or is he not? Which one is it? And if he is Hitler, why are you wishing him well? Are these guys just mechanisms of the state? And maybe that's where the conversation is going. And we can take this when we come back because we only have 2 minutes, unless you want to start on it now. Basically, are we looking at media that are just mechanisms of the state? And so when we were making and having these conversations about issues of class and everything else, it's yes, but state is functioning from the standpoint of class anyway. So whether it's media or whether it's some kind of political institution, these guys are functioning in some part, hand in glove. Is that where we're getting at, Ted?
I think it is, and I think the cognitive dissonance, like you mentioned, Margaret Kimberly, is just so obvious that it makes the state and its propaganda outlets look absurd. I mean, for example, they're literally trying to say that Donald Trump is a fascist, but the solution to that is to vote him out. Well, fascists like Hitler and Mussolini couldn't be voted out. They had to be removed by more extreme means. So if Trump were to just leave, it would prove that he wasn't really a fascist. Fascist tendencies, perhaps, but fascist, no. And there's a lot of those kind of just gaps between, the inherent contradictions between the different propaganda streams that we're seeing coming out of this system.
You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. The voice you were just listening to was Ted Rall, political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. We will be back in a moment with Fault Lines, Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Rall. Ted Rall, specifically, he's our guest for this segment, continuing our conversation from the last. He's a political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. And by the way, you can follow him on Twitter at Ted Rall. That's Rall with 2 L's. And you can and should read his cartoons and articles at Rall.com. Ted, we're doing kind of a wrap up this segment. I'm curious. I want to bring it to the debates, back to the debates. What's your opinion, specifically the presidential debate, and then 1 week later, the vice presidential debate? The first was a dumpster fire. The second, as far as I can tell, was a snooze fest. Most people in their coverage of it were reporting on the fly. That was what they thought was most notable. The fly on Pence's head. Admittedly, kind of amusing, but I'm just curious, where do you think this is going? What do you think about the contrast between these two? And particularly looking forward to these next two debates, potentially not going to happen based on how the campaigns are responding to each other. Where do you think this is going to go, Ted?
Well, in both debates, and I think this is, again, takes us back to the previous segment in our discussion about journalism, the biggest failure was really the moderator. The first, Chris Wallace, was walked all over, and Susan Page from USA Today never insisted that either candidate actually answer the question that they were asked. It really made me miss Chris Matthews from MSNBC, who was one of the old hosts who actually would insist that candidates answer questions, whether in an interview or while hosting a debate. He got Me Too'd, so we're never going to see him again, I think, or not for a while. But it's really a disservice to the American people. The voters deserve to have actual issues that affect their lives. First of all, have those issues brought up in debates, which they often are not. But when they are, they deserve a straight answer, and there should be no time limitation to extract that answer. The candidates should be forced to twist on the moderator's fork until they cough up an actual real position on these subjects, but they just didn't. I kind of have a different take on each debate than the mainstream media. I think Donald Trump, although he did sort of take a ball in the polls, accomplished what he wanted to, which was to make Joe Biden look weak and sort of easy to overwhelm. Trump's sales pitch is very Mussolini-like. He wants to appear as the strong man, no matter what. That's what his post-COVID-19 behavior has been all about. I am strong man. I will defeat anything. I can kill anything, including a fatal virus. So I think he's staying on message. With that behavior. And in terms of the vice presidential debate, I was surprised that Kamala Harris failed to close the deal. It was a bit of a draw, and I think that she wasn't able to just destroy Mike Pence. And I think there were some reasons for the lack of empathy. She definitely played the DA, but she didn't seem to really care about all the mayhem and suffering that the American people are going through. She seemed to be more interested in mocking Pence and scoring points. And, TV is a good BS detector. And I think it sort of reminded me why she didn't really take off during the primaries. There's something cold about her.
Gloating.
She wants the job. She wants the job. Everything else is subordinate to that, unfortunately. It's not, and I know exactly what you mean by that. If Sanders is running and he's making an argument, he cares. He clearly cares about the thing that he's talking about, whatever it is. Like, people walk away from it. That guy cares about that issue. For her, it's different. It's, I want to be vice president or I want to be president. It's a very clear determination for it. And the prosecutor thing, keep in mind, this is the woman who was laughing at terrorizing a homeless mother that had 2 kids who weren't going to school appropriately. So this is the person that we're talking about, or, kept people in death row laughing that people were going to jail for pot. I mean, this is the person who we are talking about. She decided to become a prosecutor. I think that's a certain temperament. But I do one thing. The vice presidential debate this year, I think, was probably, whether people realize it or not, one of the most influential coming up, because that woman could really be president. I mean, Joe Biden is a wisp of himself. Look at Joe Biden 4 years ago. This is a completely, fundamentally different man that is running in this race. And I think people need to take that seriously. Do you take any credence to this idea, let's call it a hypothesis, that ultimately the Democratic establishment really did want Kamala Harris and the public did not? And the way that they got around that was basically installing her for vice president, knowing that Joe Biden may not be able to carry the burden for 4 years. That's a conspiracy theory, but I'm asking you, what do you think?
Well, we certainly know that the DNC isn't above conspiring. I think what they did right before and at Super Tuesday,
no, they're not.
By coordinating the simultaneous endorsements by Beto O'Rourke and Amy Klobuchar and the rest for Joe Biden, shows that they're able to conspire, and certainly the 2016 emails certainly show that they conspired. But I see they certainly conspired to install Biden. The question is, did they know that Kamala Harris was going to be the number 2 all along? It's the odds of that are not 0, but they're also not 100% either. And I think it says something about the state of the Democratic Party, that you can sort of say, well, that's entirely possible. They knew that the choice of vice president was going to be absolutely essential. That basically, as Catholics would think of Pope Benedict, who was very old when he assumed the papacy and in fact had to step down, that they knew that Biden was going to be, as he himself has said, a transitional figure. In fact, that he may not finish. He's very likely to not finish his term. 4 out of 10 American presidents have either succeeded to the presidency via election or through death. So it's or through resignation in Jerry Ford's case. So it's every vice president's thinking about that. It's possible. She's not the choice I would have made if I were sitting on the DNC and had a corporatist outlook. I probably would have gone with someone who had more charisma, like Cory Booker or someone like that. But it seems to be certainly, I doubt that Joe Biden picked Kamala Harris all by his lonesome. and that she was his top choice. I would be very surprised if that turned out to be the case.
I remember many observers during the primaries, and I'm kind of leaving it vague because I forget exactly who. I remember Caleb Maupin was making this call, saw Kamala as the establishment pick. That seems to have been thoroughly vindicated by her being pushed, as we're talking about right now, into his vice presidential slot. I want to turn to something else for a second, though. Towards the end there, you were talking about how presidents would leave office. You mentioned, impeachment, resignation. You also mentioned death. That was a topic brought to the minds of many this week after President Trump contracted COVID. Where do you think that leaves him? I mean, he got sick. He seems to have recovered pretty darn quickly from what his doctor's saying. And yet he's apparently at least associated with the infections of many in the White House and in American politics. So that's, at the very least, it's optical, but there's also probably a grain of truth in it. I don't know whether he personally infected him, but, anybody looking at the situation can definitely level heavy criticism on him for his handling of the virus, his arguable negligence, all that stuff. But where do you think that's going to leave him in the public side, Ted?
I think this has always been a turnout game. This election is never there. I think anybody who's still sitting around, sort of weighing these two men, Biden and Trump, and thinking, well, I could go either way, is probably insane, and I'm not sure should be allowed to vote. It's like they're so completely different. I think everyone's mind is made up. If it was like in Fight Club, and you go up to someone in the street and put a gun to their head and say, you have to vote for one of these two guys. Everyone knows who they're going to vote for, but that's not what elections are like. Elections are about, well, do I feel like getting up and putting on a mask and standing in line for 7 hours in the rain to vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump? And the enthusiasm gap is absolutely what is going to determine this election more than has been ever before. It really killed Hillary Clinton's candidacy, and I think it hobbles down Joe Biden. Trump's people know and do not care, and what Trump said famously about his people standing by him, even if he were to shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, remains even truer today than it did 4 years ago. Because liberals like to say, well, yeah, now there's a record. What Democrats don't understand is that Trump's voters like that record. They think that unlike an establishment candidate, Trump tried to do or did do, or at least stayed true to the conservative or right-wing nativist values that he ran on. He didn't pivot to the left at all after he got elected, unlike a more mainstream establishment Republican politician like, say, a George H.W. Bush would have done. So they like that. They're happy with him. They're going to vote. The question is whether hatred of Trump, which is really the only thing driving Biden's campaign, is going to drive enough enthusiasm. And it very well could. The polls suggest that it will. But I think it's far from a done deal.
Yeah, I don't think it's a done deal either. I think it's closer than I think people realize. Well, that's not true. I think Trump is going to lose this. But I think it's closer than what people realize. And I 1,000% agree with you that it's depending upon energy. And, you ask how many people are going to vote for Trump. And you have, 70% or more saying, yeah, this is our guy. How many people vote for Biden? You have 70-something, 80% saying, we're doing it just because we want to stop Trump. Is that a diminishment of politics? That factor right there by itself, meaning this inability to vote for somebody because it's who you want, or for that matter, because it's the guy that you need to deal with the material conditions that are around you. That seemed to be lost in all of this.
There's always been a strong negative vote against candidates. People. When I voted for Walter Mondale, I was very much voting against Ronald Reagan. But no candidate has ever won before that kind of campaign. Mondale lost. Caucasus lost. Those candidates lose. Biden, if he wins, that would be the history that he's making. Is that he be the first candidate to pull off a purely non-affirmative, but just purely reactive campaign against a sitting incumbent. It has just never worked before. It could work. There's the first time for everything. It looks likely, although Trump's ace in the hole is the 12th Amendment and the legal challenges to the recount, to the mail-in counting that trigger the 12th Amendment. I really think that's where his head is at. I don't think this is really a popular or even an electoral vote election anymore. I think he's thinking about trying to run out the clock till December 14th so that 270 electoral votes haven't been properly certified for either candidate. And then the election goes to the House of Representatives, where there are 50 votes, one for each state. And the new Congress will pull those triggers. And if things go, they'll go, then Donald Trump would have at least 26 of those delegations and would remain in office regardless of how many votes Biden gets.
Yeah, this election and November is going to be terrifying. And going into December is terrifying because you're right. This may not be an election that's based on the vote. It may be an election based on the Supreme Court or some kind of congressional, screwery. But yeah, I agree with you. This is Ted Rall, political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back for our last segment of the week in a moment.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. As Jamarl just mentioned, this is our last show of the week. So with that, I'm going to get a tiny bit of house cleaning out of the way. We're not going to be around on Monday. Monday is Columbus Day. It's a federal holiday. We, like many other people across this country, are taking that day off. So don't be concerned if you don't hear us then. We're also, by the way, taking calls this segment. 202-521-1320 now is the best. It is actually the last time to call us this week. I'm going to go straight to Tarif from New Orleans. Again, the number is 202-521-1320. But Tarif, you're on. What's going on?
Good morning, gentlemen. I have two things to say, two comments. Before I say it, I think Trump should go on Joe Rogan and talk with him, maybe even Biden, by themselves. Okay. I was thinking about, when I called your father's show yesterday, Mr. Shanahan show, an idea popped up in my head. I started thinking about, COVID-19. Since Trump came out and said that these therapeutics and one day the vaccine will be free, when people get COVID-19 and they have to stay home, they need to, if they catch it, they have to, if they test for it, they catch it, right? If they have it, they need at least to give 2 weeks off and it would pay, either from the job or the government take care of them, or you can get unemployment for 2 weeks and then take care of themselves by taking therapeutics. Because the average person work anywhere from making $6,000 a year, that's like waiter or waitress, to $30,000 a year, can't afford their insurances and also the tests and things like that and the medicines, right? So just give them 2 weeks off and treat them with therapy so they get better and they go back to work. And also, yesterday I was thinking about, somebody told me that if, I didn't know this was happening, but they had people when schools wasn't open throughout the country, they had people that would have to quit their jobs because they had to stay home to teach their children on the computer. And they had to go on food stamps and WIC just to survive. And I don't think they was getting unemployment. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why you see the homeless rate going up in the past 6 months, in my opinion. So they need a program for schools that's closed because of COVID-19, for a place for where children go to so the parents can go to work. Because these single mothers or single fathers, if they don't have no family around them or friends to watch their children, then they stuck out. Because that means they might have to quit their job just to stay home with their children. So people are actually suffering from the ranges of $6,000 a year, your waiters and waitresses, to $30,000 to $34,000 a year. The poor people, us, we ain't making that type of money, like $100,000 a year, where we can afford nanny. You know what I'm saying? So it's really having an impact on people that catch COVID-19. They don't have, nobody to watch the children. They got to stay at home or whatever. They need at least to get paid 2 weeks of pay and get the treatment where they can save their lives and they go back and be productive, and also a place where the children go to so where they can go to work. You see what I'm saying? That's all I wanted to say.
Sharif, I agree. I'm sure. Jamarl, quick take here, but I'm guessing you agree too. What's your take?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we should have a government that's responsive to the material needs of the population, seeing as that population is what keeps society going. I agree, 1,000%.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I'm going to make the slightly more localist argument here too. I think you can also do that on the community level. I think that if you have people functionally, I mean, this is a sort of broader thing. I want to get into this with Tom, assuming we can get him on Tuesday, Tom Luongo, our libertarian guest. We talked about this before, culture and government as these sort of two oppositional forces in some sense, not necessarily oppositional. Obviously, cultural mores lead to the governmental laws to some extent, at least. And clearly the government plays a role in shaping culture historically, whether it's propaganda or consolidating politics under some set of cultural values. But broadly, I mean, here's a point that I'd make. This goes back to Alexis de Tocqueville. If you lose that community, if you lose those resilient structures of local support that people on the left and the right, frankly, we've had a bunch of guests on the left, we've had guests on the right, they all agree we need more of that local power. If you lack that, then what you have to rely on ultimately is governmental authority. And usually, that's by fiat. And usually it comes with a price tag, whether literal or symbolic. And none of us like paying that bill. Even if we're satisfied paying the economic bill, in the long run, what you get is a hollowing out of American society. And so I'm not going to take the hard libertarian tack here and say, we should entirely replace government with local efforts, because frankly, I don't see how that can happen. But if there's some movement, and maybe we'll see it in this era of what appears to be decentralization on a global and a national scale, if we see that, then if we push it in the right direction, then you might get resilient local communities that can support each other, which would mean that, they can weather these kinds of storms much better than we appear to be weathering this one. We've got another caller, but Jamarl, you wanna come back on that real quick, or should we just move on? What's your take?
We can move on. I mean, the local thing, I think I partially agree. I think I partially agree. It's not that I'm against the local thing. From the standpoint though of decaying structures, I think the problem is a loss of legitimacy, and I don't think it's the federal government issue, if that makes sense. Like, yes, I agree with you that there may be a diminishment of locality and those type of things, but at the end of the day, you still have your local governments. You still have, these local state structures and all of this other stuff. Those things are still there. Those haven't gone anywhere. If I would make a different point, I would say that if you're talking about civic engagement, and civic engagement may be one of those things where people get more involved. And at 20-something, yes, I get it. At 30-something, you're doing a job, you have a kid, you work all day, you don't feel like doing it. If you're talking about civic engagement, I think you're talking about something more like Richard Wolff, where he is saying, if you want to have real, honest to God, civic engagement where people are involved in their government in a way that's more organic, do it at work. And his argument is basically get rid of the CEOs out of the company, get rid of the totalitarian structures where people get accustomed to just kind of bending their heads and doing what they do and going home, as opposed to having people that are engaged democratically in regards to their jobs. So when they go outside of their jobs, it is that much more normal for them to do it when they're in normal life. That's his argument, that you can't have one and the other, that you can't have a situation where people are doing something dramatically different for the majority of their day, and then they go out and shift their frame of reference and do something else. That it's hard to maintain both. I think I may agree with him on that. Honestly, I don't see the point of CEOs and stuff in these systems. I think it's
that'll be a fascinating conversation.
Yeah,
we should totally have that. We should totally have that back and forth. Maybe with Tom, maybe with other guests. We'll see. But in any event, we're taking calls 202-521-1320. We may have time for one more call after we go to EJ from Florida. EJ, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Hey, how's it going? Can you guys hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of touch on the debates and why I think I don't think Trump is going to lose, to be honest. I think that Trump actually now I respect a lot of stuff that you said, Jamarl, because you're usually right. But for just this one, I have to disagree because Joe Biden has been trash his entire career, and he's done harmful things. Two things, they're talking about the tax returns, and on stage, Trump said, look, I just took advantage of a program that was implemented by the Obama administration. He said, I didn't do anything illegal. You're talking about my tax returns. I benefited from something that was specifically to cater to the rich, and I did just that. That's you. The crime bill, that's you. Oh, even if Donald Trump is a huge proponent of white nationalists or anything, telling the Proud Boys to stand by and all, that still does a lot less than that crime bill did. That broke up families, and subsequently it destroyed generations of people. That's something that Biden was responsible for. Trump is not. He has nothing to do with that. I think Trump has actually been more beneficial just because the inadvertent transparency that he creates. What's dangerous to me is things that I don't see. When you're if you're sick and you're like, I don't know why, they're going to spend a bunch of time diagnosing it. Trump is essentially like, okay, this is it. We got an X-ray on all this. This is exactly where it's at. Here's the illness. It's illuminated, and that makes it less dangerous. It's like if I'm looking out in the jungle and there's a tiger or a lion, it's like or a snake. If I can't see it, I'm going to be victim to it at some point in time. It's going to jump and pounce. That's why these things are silent when they hunt.
No, EJ, I understand what you mean. You're basically saying that he brings this to light. Like, you get to see all the vagaries. You get to see it rips the mask off, the flaming face of Ghost Rider, as opposed to having a smooth-talking Obama that just kind of let that stuff ride. I guess my issue, or the point that I'm making here, though, is if that is true, and if you're right, if it's illuminating, if it's one of those things that throws light on the roaches in this case, and the Democrats turn and say, Donald Trump threw those roaches there. It was all nice. It was all warm and fuzzy. Obama made you feel nice and warm inside. And now this monster who's eating your puppies and kicking babies, and that bug wasn't there until Trump got there. I'm making the point that the illuminating light is going to get blamed on him. That's my point. And that there's a record. Oh. You don't think so? You don't think that record that's under Trump is going to matter from the standpoint of the way the public is looking at it? I will go further. You're from Florida. Biden is going to win Florida. He's going to win Florida.
Okay. I see what you're saying, but when people look into it, the bottom line is those problems existed before he did. Before he was there.
I agree with you. I don't agree with. I don't disagree with anything you said. Biden did do that crime bill, and the Democrats are horrendous. Obama did get 95% of the income gains to the top 1%. All of that stuff is true. I'm making a point that it's not going to matter. The politics, in many respects, is optics. Why do you think Mike Pence could stay in that debate and come out either winning or drawing? Because Mike Pence is a longtime politician who's been doing this for forever. He did it with Tim Kaine when Donald Trump was the most bombastic as a candidate. And he did it with Kamala Harris. And he comes out looking polished. It's not that the vagaries aren't there. It's more so that the ability to, how can I say it, elucidate it in a way, from Trump's standpoint of saying, hey, this was here before I got here, is to some degree hidden by the politics of Trump and how loud he is. Like my mom would say it. She would say the problem with Trump is he has a big mouth. Again, she's not saying policy. She's saying the problem with Trump is a big mouth.
What happens as a result of that is that that are going to fail, that are meant to fail, will ultimately fail. Because, like Mike Pence, for example, that debate, he lied about things that not even months ago you could see Trump, like when he was saying, "Oh, Donald Trump didn't say it." It's like he's on camera saying this, and just the fact that you see just all these underqualified people that are in these positions with this extreme amount of power.
30.
This extreme amount of power. And
AJ, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to cut you short, man. We're about to end this show, but look, thank you for the call.
We've got to go.
Yeah.
Real quick note, by the way, before we go out, we are not going to be back on Monday. Just letting folks know it's Columbus Day. It's a federal holiday. I know I've been repeating this, but folks deserve to know. Any event. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Closing out the week, you've been listening to Fault Lines with Jamarl Thomas and Shane Stranahan. Thanks to engineer Andre and our producers. We will be back next Tuesday.
Guys, I want to thank all of you again. End of the week for Fault Lines. We will not be here from the standpoint of Fault Lines. I will be here probably on Monday doing a show. What I'm hoping is we can get a contributor appreciation show back up and running. We haven't done one of those in a while, ever since the hospitalization stuff. So let's definitely I'll check with the wife and see what Mrs. Thomas is doing and see if we can get that going on the marquee. But look, guys, I want to thank all of you for joining us. Fault Lines, Thomas, Stranahan, the little engine that could, the awesome radio show, right here, Marcus Will. The funny thing with Biden is that progressives have no issue to hold his feet to the fire on. Right. What promises? Right. Progressives are going to hold his feet. Right. Paris Accord. Yes. Yeah. Isn't that strange and funny? And this is kind of the whole thing about, I would say, about Hillary Clinton. When she was running the race, she didn't necessarily want anything to be pinned down on. If you don't make promises, you can't be pinned down. Or you can make a promise with so many caveats that the promise becomes negated by the caveats. Well, in Biden's case, he didn't even try to do that. It's not about policy. It's about not being Trump. That's what I'm running on. And I may give you flourishes of stuff out there, but at the end of the day, it's not about policy. It's mano a mano. And you're going to compare me with my persona to his persona. And you're going to put me in office because of it. That's why I call it a diminishing of democracy. That's why I call it that. Because it's not people saying, yes, I'm voting for this guy because he's going to deal with the 30 million people of unemployed. He's going to deal with the climate change. He's going to deal with this, deal with that. No, that's not it. That's not it. There's nothing to do with it. Please save us. Please save us, Joe Biden. Ass cheeks out. Head down. Please save us. Those are your politics, United States. Progressives will not stand down if Joe wins. Trudy? Oh, Trudy! Trudy, are you saying that? Are you really saying that? Do you really believe that? Do you, honest to God, believe that? Trudy, what will happen? What will happen when Joe Biden wins is that every Democrat that was terrified of Trump will stand down. And they would say, thank God Joe Biden is in the White House. That's what they would say. And every lefty who feels some kind of way about it will be told to shut the fuck up. That's what they will be told. Shut up. Shut up. The Republicans are attacking Joe Biden. Why are you helping the Republicans? Oh, you're a Republican apologist. You're this, you're that. Look, if you would accept the moniker that you were somehow responsible for getting Joe Biden or getting Trump elected, or for that matter, a vote for Jill Stein is somehow a vote for Donald Trump. If you accept this voter shaming, then why wouldn't you accept the shaming for the other part? If it works for one, why wouldn't it work for the other? The voter shaming stuff is nonsense. It is the responsibility of the candidate to get your vote. And the fact that lefties accept even the term voter shaming is diminutive in some respects of meaning you're on some level accepting it. Even accepting the premise is absurd to me. And yet, lefties do. I'm making the point, Fruity, that not only will you stand down, you will be shouted down. And in the same way you are so terrified of Donald Trump right now that you would abdicate the ability to push for somebody to represent your interests and to push for a candidate to represent your interests. You can't even push for them to represent your interests now. And you're in the midst of a presidential process. Why would that power somehow expand after the fact, after he's in office? I don't see it. Not only will you stand down, you will lay down. You will lay down. Xavier Foster, you think Biden wins because of this? Honestly, yes, I do. Not specifically for this, and I think we were talking about the topic for yesterday. It's a cumulative thing. It's this idea that you only have so many fuck-ups. At least in my head. If Trump wins, I don't know what it means at that point. That's where I'm at. Now, something can happen between now and then, but at the end of the day, the person who needs these debates are Trump, not Biden. Biden is an X factor-ish, because the public, to some degree, believes they have an idea of who he is in his head. So at the very least, he has a certain degree of standing. Trump has a litany of fuck-ups, and he seems erratic and out of his gourd right now. Now, his supporters love that, but Trump needs to get more than just his supporters in order to win. And that therein lies the issue, and therein lies the problem. I think some of these polls are set in order to set a perspective, yes. But I don't think all of them are set that way. And because I don't think all of them are set that way, even if I give him the benefit of the doubt and say, yeah, this race may be closer, I have a hard time thinking he pulls it off. But I could be wrong. This race didn't have to be this way. Trump could have pushed for coronavirus, Medicare for everyone with coronavirus. He could have did that. He could have pushed to ensure that the drugs for the thing are like no cost earlier, not waiting all the way to the end of this stuff. He could have taken Nancy Pelosi's offer for cash, whatever the hell she offered. Take it, run with it. I'm the president of the United States. I'm going to get this done, and browbeat his party to get something else with it. I mean, this could have turned out differently. That's my point. He could have had on masks early on and pushed his people to wear those masks early on, who probably would have also fell in line to the alpha male. In which case, you could have opened the economy up sooner, which would have mean the country would have gotten on a better foot. The country wasn't blaming him for it in early days. They started to blame him for it after the fact when he realized he was incompetent. So there are plenty of things that Trump could have did to make this different. And he could have undercut and went to the left of Joe Biden on this stuff. And I think he would have been in a far better position to win this. He didn't do those things. So this is where we are. 200,000 people dead. That falls at the level of the president. Always. If Obama was in office, that happened to Obama, Trump would be saying the exact same thing. So I'm holding to the same standard that he would have. So yeah, I think this is problematic for him, to put it mildly. How do you have 30 million people out of a job and the president still gets reelected? I don't have an answer to that question. And so if the answer becomes yes, I don't know what that means. That's why I end up in this thing of thinking Trump loses. But this is 2020. Who knows? Like, share, and subscribe.